Hello everyone, I'm Tea and Murder. I know a lot of you use these videos to help you drift off, so before we begin, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now, settle in and unwind. The headlights appeared without, warning twin beams cutting through the darkness behind me. I narrowed my eyes at the rearview mirror, my grip tightening around the wheel. Where had this truck come from? The highway had been empty for miles. It was well past midnight, and I was nearing the end of an exhausting cross-country drive. My eyelids felt scratchy, and the endless ribbon of road ahead had blurred into a dull trance. I'd been pushing hard, trying to make it home by sunrise, but now, with this truck bearing down on me, I was fully alert. Its cab ballooned in my mirror, far too close. I tapped the brakes, hoping the driver would get the message and back off. No such luck. If anything, it drew even nearer. "Come on." "Just go around," I muttered, sliding into the right lane. But the truck mimicked my move perfectly, clinging to my bumper. I could almost count the bolts on its towering grille. My heartbeat picked up. This wasn't normal, not even for a reckless tailgater. I pressed harder on the accelerator, watching the numbers rise 70, 75, 80 miles per hour. The truck stuck to me like a shadow, never losing ground. A chill crept up my spine. I was alone on a deserted highway with a truck that seemed intent on forcing me off the road. My thoughts spun with possibilities, each more unnerving than the last road rage, a drunk behind the wheel, or something far worse. Then I spotted a sign for a rest area and made a split-second decision. I'd pull in, maybe someone else would be there. There's safety in numbers, right? I veered onto the exit ramp. The truck followed. I cursed it under my breath, hands slick on the wheel as I navigated the winding, pitch-black road toward the rest stop. The lot came into view, dimly lit by a single flickering street lamp. It was deserted. I parked near the restroom building and killed the engine. The truck's headlights still burned in my mirror, blinding me. I squeezed my eyes shut, heart hammering in my chest. This was it. Whatever was coming, it was happening now. Seconds passed. Nothing. The light behind me vanished. Cautiously, I opened my eyes and turned. The lot was empty. No truck, no headlights, just blackness, and the faint buzz of the street lamp overhead. I sat frozen, unable to move, my brain trying to make sense of what had just happened. Had I imagined it? Had sleep deprivation made me hallucinate some ghostly truck? Eventually, I worked up the nerve to get out of the car. The cool night air struck me sharp and bracing. I walked a slow loop around the lot, half expecting the truck to reappear at any second, but there was nothing. No trace it had ever been there. As the adrenaline wore off, exhaustion came crashing back. I decided to try sleeping in the car before finishing the drive. I reclined the seat and closed my eyes, but sleep never came. Every time I began to drift off, I jerked awake, convinced I'd heard the low growl of an engine. The sky was just starting to lighten when I finally gave up on sleep altogether. I needed coffee desperately if I was going to make it the rest of the way home. I started the car and pulled out of the rest stop, constantly scanning my mirrors for any sign of the truck. The highway was still eerily empty as I merged. Back on, my nerves were frayed, and every vehicle on the horizon made my heart lurch. But none of them were the truck that had haunted me. About an hour later, I spotted a 24-hour diner just off the road. The parking lot was half full, a welcome sight after the isolation of the night. I pulled in, craving caffeine and the comfort of other people. The bell above the door jingled. As I stepped inside, a few patrons glanced up, then returned to their conversations and meals. I slid into a booth by the window close enough to keep an eye on both my car and the highway beyond. A waitress approached with a coffee pot in hand. "Rough night?" she asked, eyeing my disheveled appearance as she filled my mug. I nodded, wrapping my hands around the warm cup. "You could say that. Had a bit of a scare on the highway." She raised an eyebrow. "Oh? What happened?" I hesitated, suddenly unsure. How could I explain what I'd been through without sounding completely paranoid? "There was this truck," I said finally. "It followed me for miles, stayed right on my bumper. When I pulled into a rest stop, it vanished. The waitress's expression changed. Something flickered in her eyes. Was it recognition? She glanced around the diner, then leaned in closer. "You're not the first to come through here with a story like that," she said in a low voice. My blood turned cold. "What do you mean?" She sighed, then slid into the seat across from me. "In the past few months, we've had a handful of drivers stop here shaken, talking about a truck that chased them along the highway, always late at night. Always on the same stretch you just came from." I leaned forward, hanging on her every word. "Did they ever see who was driving it?" She shook her head. "That's the weird part. No one ever sees a driver, and the truck, it always vanishes without a trace." A chill crept up my spine. "What? What do you think it means?" The waitress shrugged, though her eyes were grave. "I don't know. But there's been a rash of robberies along that highway lately. Cars left abandoned, drivers missing. The police still haven't caught whoever's behind it." My thoughts spun, trying to make sense of it all. A phantom truck, vanishing drivers, a trail of unsolved crimes. It felt like something out of a nightmare. "Has anyone reported the truck to the police?" I asked. She nodded. "A few have tried. But without evidence, and with the truck always vanishing, let's just say the cops aren't exactly racing to investigate." I leaned back, taking it all in. A part of me felt relieved. I wasn't the only one who'd experienced it. I hadn't imagined it, but a deeper part of me was afraid. What was really happening out there on that desolate stretch of highway? She must have seen the fear in my expression. She reached out and gave my hand a gentle pat. "Look, you made it here in one piece. That's what counts. My advice? Try to drive during the day if you can. And if you ever see that truck again, get to a public place fast." I nodded, grateful for both her kindness and her warning. As she turned to leave, a thought struck me. "Wait," I called after her. "You mentioned there have been robberies." "Missing drivers. But I wasn't robbed. The truck didn't even stop when I pulled over. Why not?" She paused, glancing back with a grim expression. "Maybe you got lucky, or maybe—" She hesitated. "Maybe they were just watching, studying your habits, how you react. For next time." With that chilling thought, she walked away, leaving me alone with my cooling coffee and a mind racing with possibilities. I stayed in the diner far longer than I meant to, slowly nursing cup after cup while the sun climbed higher. The normalcy of the morning crowd helped ground me, reminded me the world wasn't just made of lonely highways and ghostly trucks. When I finally hit the road again, I felt steadier. The highway looked different in daylight, less threatening. But the sense of being watched never left me. Somewhere out there, I felt certain the driver of that phantom truck was waiting for another chance. I made it home without incident. But the experience haunted me. I started researching highway robberies in the area, hunting for patterns, for clues. I even thought about reporting what I'd seen, but always stopped short. What could I say that wouldn't make me sound unhinged? Weeks passed, and the sharpness of that night slowly dulled. I still avoided that stretch of road after dark, but the fear began to fade. Life moved on. Then about a month later, I saw a news report that turned my blood to ice. A car had been discovered abandoned along that same stretch, the driver gone. Witnesses reported seeing a large truck in the area shortly before the disappearance. As I stared at the screen, that familiar chill crept down my spine. I couldn't help but wonder, had I truly escaped that night? Or had I merely postponed the inevitable? The road stretched ahead, a dark ribbon carved into the night. But now, every pair of headlights in my mirror made me tense. Every truck that passed sent my heart hammering. The quiet calm of nighttime driving had vanished, replaced by a persistent, gnawing dread. One thing was certain: I'd never see an empty highway the same way again. Because now I knew the truth: sometimes, in the dead of night, those roads aren't empty at all. And the things hiding in the dark don't always disappear when you confront them. The shovel hit something hard, jarring my arms. I froze, wiping sweat from my brow with a dirt-smeared hand. We'd been digging for hours. The well was supposed to be nothing but soil for another 10 feet. I called down to my son, Jake, who was working beside me in the hole. "Hey, grab the flashlight, will you? I think we've hit something." I had no idea that metallic clang would be the sound that changed everything. I'd inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago. It was a fixer-upper, to put it kindly. But after the divorce, it offered a chance at a new beginning. Jake and I had thrown ourselves into the work mending fences, restoring the barn and now digging a new well. The old one had dried up years ago, and without water, we didn't stand a chance of making this place work. Jake aimed the flashlight where my shovel had struck. The beam bounced off something smooth and metallica. Sharp contrast to the dark soil around it. "What is that, Dad?" Jake asked, his voice tinged with both wonder and worry. I shrugged, already brushing more dirt away with my hands. "I don't know, bud. Let's find out." As we kept digging, the object slowly emerged. It was a metal container about the size of a small suitcase. It looked ancient, the once shiny surface now pocked and rusted. My mind flooded with possibilities. A time capsule, hidden loot, or maybe just some old junk a farmer had buried and forgotten. It took nearly another hour of careful digging to free the container from the ground. By the time we wrestled it out of the well, the sun was dipping low, long shadows crawling across the field. We carried it back to the barn in silence, each of us lost in thought, imagining what secrets it might hold. Beneath the harsh glow of the barn's floodlights, I studied the container more closely. It was sealed shut, with no obvious latch or handle. A faint inscription was barely visible along one side, but decades of rust had rendered it unreadable. "Should we open it?" Jake asked, nearly vibrating with excitement. I hesitated. A part of me thought we should call the police or maybe a lawyer. What if it was evidence in some old crime? But curiosity won out. "All right," I said, reaching for the crowbar. "Stand back." It took some effort, but eventually the lid groaned open. The smell hit us first musty and wet, like the air in a forgotten cellar. Inside, wrapped in layers of waxy paper, was a stack of photographs and documents. I picked up the first photo and held it beneath the light. It showed a young woman, maybe in her early 20s, smiling at the camera. The picture was faded, probably from the 1960s, judging by her hairstyle and clothes. I flipped it over. On the back, scrawled in faded ink, "Sarah Milligan, 1964. Jake peered over my shoulder. "Who's that, Dad?" I shook my head. I don't know. But even as I said it, something twisted in my gut. The name Milligan rang a bell, but I couldn't say why. We spent the next hour sifting through the box's contents. More photos, all of the same young woman, Sarah, in various spots that looked like this very farm. There were also letters, yellowing newspaper clippings, and a small leather-bound journal. As I thumbed through the journal, a brittle news article fell out. The headline made my skin crawl. "Local woman still missing after 3 months." I scanned the article quickly, heart pounding. Sarah Milligan had disappeared from her family's farm in the summer of 1964. Despite an extensive search, no trace of her had ever been found. The article mentioned that Sarah's father, the farm's owner, was the main suspect, but he'd never been charged due to lack of evidence. "Dad?" Jake's voice brought me back. "What's wrong?" I looked at him, trying to keep my voice steady. "Jake, I think we just found evidence in a very old missing persons case." His eyes went wide. "Really? Like a real mystery?" I nodded, still trying to process it all. "Yeah, bud. A real mystery." I began gathering the documents, careful not to disturb them more than necessary. "We need to call the police." The next few hours passed in a blur. Deputies arrived at the farm, followed by detectives and a full crime scene unit. Our quiet little farmhouse became the epicenter of sudden, intense activity. Jake and I were questioned separately, recounting and re-recounting how we'd discovered the box. It was past midnight before the chaos finally began to subside. The container and all of its contents were taken in as evidence, and we were told not to speak about the case with anyone. Not that we had anyone to tell. We were still new in town and barely knew the neighbors. I tucked Jake into bed, his head buzzing with excitement over our discovery. But sleep wouldn't come for me. I sat at the kitchen table, a cold cup of coffee in front of me, staring out across the dark, empty fields. What had really happened to Sarah Milligan? And why did her name feel so familiar? The next morning, I drove into town, determined to find answers. The local library was small, but it had archives of the town's newspaper going back decades. I spent hours hunched over the microfiche machine, combing through everything I could find about the Milligan case. Sarah had been 23 when she disappeared, engaged to be married. Her fiancé had reported her missing after she failed to show up for a date. The last person to see her was her father, James Milligan, who claimed she'd gone into town to run errands and never returned. As I read, the pieces began falling into place. James Milligan, that was my uncle's name. The same uncle who had left me this farm? With a mounting sense of dread, I finally understood why Sarah's name had triggered something. My mother had mentioned her once, years ago, a cousin who went missing before I was born. I left the library in a haze, my mind spinning. Had my uncle played a role in Sarah's disappearance? Had I inherited more than just land a long-buried family secret? When I got home, a police cruiser was already parked in the driveway. Detective Reeves, the lead investigator, stood waiting for me. "Mr. Collins," she said as I stepped out of my truck, "we need to talk." We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where I'd spent that restless night. Detective Reeves didn't bother with small talk. "We've identified the DNA on several items from the box," she said, eyes fixed on mine. "It matches Sarah Milligan. We're now treating this as a homicide investigation." I nodded slowly, barely trusting my voice. "Mr. Collins, I have to ask, did you have any knowledge of this before finding the box?" I shook my head firmly. "No, absolutely not. I inherited this farm from my uncle 6 months ago." "I never even met him." She raised an eyebrow. "Your uncle?" I drew a steadying breath. "James Milligan, Sarah's father." Detective Reeves leaned back slightly, visibly surprised. "You're related to the Milligans?" I explained what I'd uncovered at the library, the family connection I'd only just realized. As I spoke, I could see the gears turning behind her eyes. "Mr. Collins, I'll be honest with you," she said when I finished. "This complicates things. We'll need to conduct a full search of the property. And I'm afraid you and your son may need to find somewhere else to stay for the time being." I nodded, feeling numb. "Of course. Whatever you need." The next few weeks were a waking nightmare. The farm became a full-fledged crime scene, with officers and forensic teams scouring every inch of the land. Jake and I moved into a motel in town, forced to watch from afar as our new home was turned inside out. The story broke on the local news, then spread nationally. Suddenly, our quiet little town was overrun with reporters and true crime fanatics. Everyone wanted to know about the mysterious box, about Sarah Milligan, about the unsuspecting farmer who had inherited a decades-old secret. I tried to shield Jake from the worst of it, but there was only so much I could do. He was old enough to understand the basics, and his early excitement over solving a mystery had faded into a sobering awareness of the truth we were now living. It was Jake who finally asked the question I'd been avoiding. "Dad, do you think Uncle James did it? Do you think he killed Sarah?" I pulled him close, wishing I had something better to say. "I don't know, buddy. I really don't." As the investigation dragged on, more details began to surface. Old case files were reopened, witnesses re-interviewed. The picture that emerged was a tragic one. Sarah had wanted to leave the farm and start a life with her fiancés. James Milligan had opposed the marriage, wanting her to stay and help with the family business. But there was no smoking gun, no confession, just a collection of circumstantial evidence and a family fractured by secrets and suspicion. At last, nearly 2 months later, we were allowed to return to the farm. The police had found no further evidence, and while the case remained open, there was no reason to keep us from our home. The farm felt different now. Every creaking board, every rustling in the fields seemed to whisper long-buried truths. I avoided the spot where we'd unearthed the box as though Sarah's ghost still lingered there. As we tried to settle back into our routines, I couldn't shake the sense that we were living beneath a shadow. The place that was meant to be our fresh start now felt stained, haunted by the past, but we stayed. partly because we had no other options, but also because it felt like we owed Sarah something to uncover what really happened, to tell her story after so many years of silence. I don't know if we'll ever learn the full truth about what happened to Sarah Milligan, but I do know this. Her story and the mystery buried on this land has become part of ours, and somehow we'll find a way to live with that, to honor her memory as we try to build a future here. Now, every time I pick up a shovel, I can't help but wonder, what other secrets lie buried beneath our feet? And are some truths better left undiscovered? The first time I noticed the blue sedan, I didn't think twice. By the third time, my hands were sweating on the wheel. By the fifth, I was struggling not to scream. It had started as a fun road trip, a chance for Emily and me to reconnect after a rough patch in our relationship. We'd mapped out a route from New York to California, planning to hit quirky roadside attractions and scenic overlooks along the way, but 3 days in, our carefree adventure had shifted into something far more unsettling. We were just outside Chicago when I first spotted the car, a plain blue sedan, probably a Toyota or a Honda, with tinted windows that made it impossible to see the driver. As I filled up the tank, it pulled into the pump across from us. Nothing unusual. But 2 hours later, at a roadside diner in the middle of nowhere, there it was again, parked a few spaces away. I nudged Emily and nodded toward the car. "Is it just me, or is that the same car from the gas station?" She squinted, then shrugged. "Could be. It's a pretty common model. Probably a coincidence." I tried to believe her, but something uneasy had begun to coil in my gut. As we ate our burgers, I kept glancing out the window, half expecting to catch someone watching us. But the car just sat there, still and empty. We hit the road again, and for a while I managed to let it go. We sang along to our playlist, played silly road trip games, and took in the changing scenery as we pushed west. But as the sun dipped low and we pulled into a small town looking for a place to spend the night, my stomach dropped. There, in the lot of the only motel around, was the blue sedan. "Mem," I said, my voice tight. She followed my gaze, and I saw the realization flicker across her face. "Okay, that's a little weird," she admitted. We checked in fast, hurrying to our room with our bags. I double-checked the lock on the door, then peeked through the curtain. The blue car was still out there, its windows reflecting the motel's flickering neon sign. "Should we call the police?" Emily asked. Quietly, I hesitated. "And say what?" "That we've seen the same car 3 times today. They'll think we're being paranoid." We barely slept that night, taking turns keeping watch, but nothing happened. By morning, the blue car was gone. I wanted to believe it was over, that maybe we really had overreacted. But as we merged back onto the highway, my heart sank. There, a few cars back, was that same familiar blue shape. "We need to lose them," I said, gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. Emily nodded, her face pale. "How?" I took the next exit without warning, drawing a chorus of angry honks from other drivers. The blue car followed. I zigzagged down random side streets, trying to stay unpredictable. Sometimes I caught flashes of our pursuer in the rearview mirror sometimes. Nothing, but they always came back into view. After nearly an hour of this cat-and-mouse chase, we ended up on a desolate country road. Cornfields stretched endlessly on both sides, broken only by the occasional barn or weathered farmhouse. "What do we do now?" Emily asked, her voice trembling. I opened my mouth to answer, but then I saw it and my heart leapt into my throat. Up ahead, an old barn stood near the roadside, its once red paint faded and peeling under the sun. Parked just behind it, barely visible, was a blue sedan. "They're waiting for us," I whispered. Emily's eyes widened with panic. "Turn around now." I slammed on the brakes, preparing to spin the car around, but it was already too late. The blue sedan pulled out from behind the barn, blocking the road ahead. At the same moment, I saw another vehicle appear in the rear view mirror, sealing off our escape. We were boxed in. Time seemed to slow as the driver's door of the blue car creaked open. A figure stepped out, and I felt the world tilt beneath me. "No," Emily breathed, her voice barely audible. "It can't be." but it was. Striding toward us, a grim smile stretched across his face. Was Emily's ex Mark? The memories came rushing back, ones I'd tried hard to bury. Emily arriving at my apartment 6 months ago, bruised and terrified. Her tearful confession about Mark's obsessive control, the violent outbursts, the restraining order we'd fought to get. Weeks of constantly looking over our shoulders, jumping at every noise. We thought it was behind us. We thought we were safe. Mark stopped at my window. I hit the lock button, pointless but instinctual. He leaned down, face inches from the glass. "Long time no see," he said, his voice muffled but unmistakably cold. "Did you really think you could just run away?" Emily sat frozen beside me, her face a pale mask of fear. I reached over and took her hand, squeezing it tight. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my eyes locked on him. "Mark," I added, my voice as steady as I could manage. His smile spread, too wide, too sharp. "I want what's mine," he said, never looking away from Emily. "She's not yours," I shot back. "She never was." His face hardened. "You don't know anything about us? About what we had?" "I know enough," I said. "I know you're violating the restraining order just by being here." He laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. "You think I care about some piece of paper? You think that's going to stop me?" Emily was shaking beside me. I had to act. "We had to get out, but how?" That's when I noticed something. The car behind us, the one blocking the road, was unfamiliar, and the driver looked uncertain, nervous. A plan began to form. Reckless, desperate, but it was all we had. "Emily," I whispered, not looking away from Mark. "When I say go, I need you to duck down. Can you do that?" She nodded, her eyes wide, confused and afraid. I drew in a deep breath. Then, in one swift motion, I turned the key in the ignition and slammed the car into reverse. "Go!" I shouted. Emily ducked, and I slammed the gas. Our car shot backward, straight at the vehicle behind us. At the last second, I caught a glimpse of the driver's face, eyes wide in panic. They swerved, just barely missing us. Mark yelled in fury, sprinting toward the car, but I was already shifting into drive, wrenching the wheel hard. We fishtailed onto the shoulder, kicking up a storm of gravel and dust. For one heart-pounding second, I thought we were going to flip. But then the tires gripped and we surged forward. I didn't look back. I just drove, pushing the car to its absolute limit. Emily slowly sat up, her face drained of color. "Are they following us?" I asked, my eyes glued to the road. She turned in her seat, scanning the darkness behind us. I don't think so. I don't see them." I didn't ease up. We drove for hours, zigzagging through unfamiliar back roads, avoiding highways. Every passing car made us tense. Every stop for gas turned into a full scan of our surroundings. It was well past midnight by the time we finally felt safe enough to stop. We found a tiny roadside motel in a town neither of us had ever heard of, paid cash for a room, and collapsed onto the bed, drained and shaken. "How did he find us?" Emily whispered in the dark. I shook my head, even though she couldn't see me. "I don't know. Maybe he tracked your phone or something. We'll get new ones tomorrow." She was silent for a while. Then, quietly, her voice cracking. "I'm so sorry. This is all my fault. I've ruined everything." I turned toward her, wrapping her in my arms. "Hey, no, this isn't your fault." "None of it. This is all on him." She buried her face in my shoulder, her body trembling with quiet sobs. I held her tight, my thoughts spiraling. What were we supposed to do now? We couldn't go home. Mark knew where we lived, where we worked. We couldn't keep traveling if he'd tracked us this far. What was stopping him from doing it again? As the first light of dawn bled through the curtains, I made a choice. "We're going to disappear," I said. Emily looked up at me, eyes red and swollen. "What do you mean?" "I mean, we're going to become different people, new names, new lives. We'll go somewhere he'd never think to look." It sounded insane, even as I said it out loud. But what other option did we have? Emily was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Okay," she said, "let's do it." And so, as the sun rose on a brand new day, we began to plan. Our disappearance. Our road trip had become an escape plan, leading us not to California, but to a whole new life. I don't know if we'll ever truly be free of Mark. I don't know if the fear will ever fully leave us. But I do know this: we're in this together, and together we'll survive. The road stretches ahead of us, filled with both danger and possibility. We drive forward into the unknown, the past shrinking in the rear view. For now, at least, we're free. The last time I saw Eliza Thompson, she was laughing. It's an image burned into my memory, her head thrown back, long dark hair catching the golden light of the sunset, the sound of her laughter carried off by the sea breeze. I didn't know then that it would be the final time I'd ever see her. Within 12 hours, she would vanish without a trace, leaving behind only questions and a growing sense of dread that threatened to consume us all. I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me start at the beginning. My name is Michael Chun, and I was a security officer aboard the Emerald Princess, a luxury cruise liner sailing through the Caribbean. It was my 3rd year on the job, and I thought I'd seen it all: drunken fights, petty theft, the occasional medical scare, nothing I couldn't handle. But Eliza's disappearance, that was different. That was something else entirely. The day began like any other at sea. I started my shift at 6 a.m., making rounds through the ship's corridors and public decks. Everything was quiet, most passengers still asleep in their cabins. As I passed the grand atrium, I spotted Eliza finishing up her night shift at the reception desk. "Morning, Michael," she said, stifling a yawn. "Anything exciting planned for today?" I shrugged. "Just the usual. You should get some rest. You look exhausted." She laughed, collecting her things. "Oh, I will. But first, I'm going to watch the sunrise from my favorite spot on the upper deck." "Want to join me?" I hesitated. I was technically on duty, but it was a slow morning. Sure, why not? I could use some fresh air. We walked together to a secluded corner on deck 16, leaning against the railing as the sky began to brighten. Eliza closed her eyes, breathing in the salty breeze. "I love this," she said quietly. "No matter how many cruises I work, this part never gets old." I watched her from the corner of my eye, struck by how serene she looked. We'd grown close over the last few months, sharing meals in the crew mess, trading stories during downtime. But in that moment, I realized how much I still didn't know about her. "How long have you been working on cruise ships?" I asked. She opened her eyes, a soft, wistful smile on her lips. 5 years now. It was supposed to be just a gap year thing after college. But I fell in love with it, the travel, the people, the sense of freedom. I nodded. I understood. That's what had kept me in the job too, despite the long hours and time away from home. We chatted a little longer as the sun climbed over the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and pink. Eventually, Eliza yawned again. "I should really get some sleep," she said. "Thanks for the company, Michael. See you later." I nodded, watching as she walked away. That was the last time I saw her alive. The rest of my shift was uneventful. It wasn't until the evening staff meeting that something felt off. "Eliza Thompson, is she here?" Our supervisor, Rita, asked, frowning down at her clipboard. She was supposed to start her shift an hour ago. A ripple of confusion moved through the room. Eliza wasn't the type to be late, let alone miss a shift entirely. "I saw her this morning," I offered. "She said she was heading to her cabin to get some sleep after the night shift." Rita's frown deepened. "Can you go check on her? Make sure everything's okay?" I nodded, unease creeping into my gut. I made my way to the crew quarters and knocked on Eliza's door, calling her name. No response. I used my master key to unlock it, half expecting to find her asleep inside. The cabin was empty. The bed was perfectly made, like no one had touched it. Her uniform for the evening lay folded neatly on a chair. Her phone rested on the nightstand screen, dark and silent. I radioed Rita. "She's not here." "The cabin looks untouched since this morning." There was a long pause before Rita responded. "Initiate search protocol now." The next few hours blurred into chaos. We scoured every corner of the ship from the engine room to the uppermost decks. We reviewed hours of security footage, questioned crew members and passengers, but Eliza was nowhere to be found. The last confirmed sighting came from a hallway camera outside her cabin at 7:12. The footage showed her entering, closing the door behind her, and then nothing. No footage of her leaving, no signs of a struggle. It was as if she had simply vanished into thin air. As the night wore on and our search yielded nothing, a tension spread through the ship. Passengers began to notice the heightened security presence whispering in corridors. Rumors started to swirl. By morning, we had to face the truth. We had a missing person. The captain made an announcement requesting any information about Eliza's whereabouts. Her photo was displayed on screens throughout the ship. We contacted the nearest port authorities and the cruise line's headquarters. A Coast Guard search was launched, though we all knew the odds of finding someone in the vastness of the Caribbean were next to none. I couldn't shake the gnawing guilt that crept through me. If only I'd walked her to her cabin that morning. If only I'd checked on her sooner. The image of her laughing at sunrise looped endlessly in my mind. As the investigation ramped up, I found myself repeating every detail of that morning to a grim-faced detective from the ship's security division. Did she seem nervous, distracted? Mention anything about plans for the day? He asked. I shook my head. No, she seemed happy, relaxed. Just said she was going to sleep. His eyes narrowed. And you're certain she entered her cabin? Yes, I replied, for what felt like the 100th time. Security footage confirms it. He nodded, jotting something in his notepad. And there's no way she could have left without being seen? I hesitated. It shouldn't be possible. That corridor's under surveillance 24/7. But even as I said it, a chill ran through me because if it wasn't possible, how had it happened? Days passed and the mystery only deepened. Eliza's cabin was combed for clues, but turned up nothing unusual. Her passport, wallet, and personal belongings were all there. No signs of violence, no indication of foul play. Speculation ran wild among passengers and crew alike. Some believed she'd fallen overboard, though how that could have happened unnoticed was unclear. Others whispered suicide, but those of us who knew Eliza rejected that outright. She had been content, bright, grounded. The most unsettling theory, the one that haunted me, was that someone on board had caused her disappearance. The idea that a killer might be among us was almost too horrifying to believe. As days turned into weeks, the investigation stalled. The ship completed its cruise and returned to port, allowing for more in-depth forensic analysis. Even then, no leads surfaced. Eliza's family flew in, their faces etched with grief and disbelief. I watched from a distance as investigators briefed them. I saw her mother collapse in sobs as the weight of it all sank in. I wanted to say something to offer some comfort, but what could I possibly say? Eventually, the Emerald Princess set sail again. A new face took Eliza's place at the reception desk. Life on board resumed its usual rhythm, at least on the surface. But for those of us who knew her, who searched for her, who were left behind with nothing but questions, nothing would ever be the same. I stayed on with the cruise line, unwilling to leave while Eliza's fate remained a mystery. Each port brought a flicker of hope that someone might come forward, that a clue might emerge. But as the months passed and silence persisted, that hope began to dim. Sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I find myself alone on deck 16, staring out at the endless stretch of sea. I think about Eliza, about her laughter, about the way she loved watching the sunrise, and I wonder where she is. If she's still out there somewhere, and I can't help but feel the ocean knows the truth, holding its secrets in its deep, unknowable silence. The disappearance of Eliza Thompson remains an unsolved mystery, a ghost story whispered among cruise ship crews. For me, it's a constant reminder of how fragile our sense of security truly is, how easily a person can disappear without a trace. And every time I watch a passenger enter their cabin, every time I scan a security feed, I can't help but wonder, could it happen again? In this floating city of steel and glass, adrift in the vast, indifferent sea, are any of us ever truly safe? The Emerald Princess sails on, carrying its cargo of vacationers and secrets. And somewhere out there, maybe Eliza is still laughing, her voice lost to the endless ocean breeze. The first slash in the tent canvas was so precise, so clean, it almost looked intentional. I traced my finger along the edge, feeling the frayed nylon threads. Whatever had done, this wasn't just sharp, it was viciously sharp. As the fading daylight filtered through the cut, casting elongated shadows across the abandoned campsite, I couldn't shake the feeling that we'd stumbled onto something far more sinister than a simple bear attack. My name's Alex, and I've been hiking the Appalachian Trail with my best friend Jamie for the past month. We're experienced backpackers, no strangers to the challenges of long-distance trekking. But nothing in all our years of outdoor adventures could have prepared us for what we found in that remote clearing deep in the Georgia wilderness. The day had started like any other on the trail. We broke camp at dawn, aiming to knock out a solid 15 miles before dark. The weather was perfect, cool, crisp, with just enough breeze to keep the bugs away. We made good time, stopping only for a quick lunch and a couple of water breaks. It was late afternoon when Jamie spotted the first sign that something was wrong. "Hey, Alex," he called, pointing toward a tree just off the trail. "Check this out." I walked over, squinting at the bark. Carved deep into the trunk was a crude symbol, a circle with a jagged line slashed through it. The cuts looked fresh, the exposed wood still leaking sap. "Weird," I muttered. "Never seen a trail marker like that before." Jamie shrugged. "Probably just some kid fooling around." We kept moving, but I couldn't shake the sense of unease. The forest was quieter than usual. The usual background of birdsong and buzzing insects was strangely absent, and I kept catching flashes of movement just beyond my peripheral vision, always vanishing the moment I turned to look. As the sun dipped lower, we began scouting for a place to set up camp. That's when we found the clearing. It was perfect flat ground nestled between two rocky outcrops with a gentle stream flowing nearby. But as we stepped closer, we realized we weren't the first ones to find this spot. The remains of a campsite lay before us as if its occupants had vanished mid-meal. A tent stood in the center, its door flap swaying gently in the breeze. A cooking pot sat beside a makeshift fire pit, the ashes long cold. Backpacks and sleeping bags were strewn about, abandoned in haste. Jamie and I exchanged glances. Something was off. Even the messiest campers usually pack up before moving on. "Hello?" Jamie called out. "Anyone here?" His voice echoed through the clearing, met only by the soft gurgle of the stream and the rustling leaves overhead. We moved forward, cautiously. That's when I saw the first slash in the tent. Then another, and another. The entire shelter was shredded, each tear clean, deliberate. "What the hell?" I breathed, peering inside the tent. The interior was a wreck. Sleeping bags torn to ribbons, clothing scattered everywhere. A flashlight lay on its side, its beam casting strange shadows as it lit up a small notebook. I picked it up and flipped to the final page. The handwriting was shaky, near frantic. Day 3. "It's still out there. We hear it at night, moving through the trees. The others think I'm losing it, but I know what I saw. It's not a bear. It's not natural. God help us if it gets." I showed the journal to Jamie and watched the color drain from his face. "We should go," he whispered. But just as I turned to leave, something caught my eye. Half hidden beneath a shredded sleeping bag was a camera. My hands trembled as I picked it up, silently praying the battery still had life. It did. The screen flickered on, revealing the last photo taken. My heart nearly stopped. The image was dark, clearly taken at night. But at the very edge of the frame, caught by the flash, was something, a shape that was almost human, but not quite, elongated limbs. A face more shadow than flesh. Eyes that glowed like a cat's in the dark, but much, much larger. I dropped the camera and stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. "We need to leave, now." But as I turned, a wave of horror crashed over me. The sun had nearly set. The forest around us thickened into shadow, twilight stretching. The trees into towering silhouettes, their forms bleeding into one another until the path ahead vanished into darkness. Jamie was already grabbing his pack. "If we move fast, we can get back to the trail," he said, tension sharpening every word. "We'll hike through the night if we have to." I nodded, snatching up my own gear. But just as I turned to follow him, something glinted near the fire pit. A flash of metal. Half buried in the soft dirt was a small silver locket. Without thinking, I scooped it up and shoved it into my pocket. We set off at a brisk pace, retracing our steps in the fading light. But nothing looked familiar anymore. The trees felt like they were pressing in, branches curling overhead like gnarled, reaching fingers. More than once, I could have sworn I heard movement in the underbrush, always just out of sight, always vanishing when I turned. "Do you remember that weird symbol we saw earlier?" Jamie panted as we pushed through a dense thicket. "I think I see another one." He was right. Carved deep into the bark of a massive oak was the same symbol, a circle split by a jagged line. This one looked older. The edges were weathered, moss creeping over the grooves. "It's probably just a coincidence," I muttered, though I didn't believe it myself. "Come on, we need to keep moving." The deeper we went, the more symbols we saw, some etched recently, others ancient and almost lost to time. They weren't random, they were leading us somewhere. But to what, I couldn't say. By now, darkness had fully settled in. Our headlamps lit narrow tunnels through the black, our footsteps crunching over dead leaves and broken twigs. The forest was deathly silent, no insects, no birds. Just the sound of our breathing. Then we heard it. A low, guttural sound, half growl, half moan, echoing through the trees. It seemed to come from everywhere at once. Jamie froze. "What was that?" I shook my head, unable to speak. Every instinct screamed at me to run, but running blindly would only get us lost. Still, we kept moving slowly, carefully. But the noises grew louder. Branches snapped behind us. Something rustled in the canopy overhead. Then just ahead I caught movement. A tall, impossibly thin figure slipping between the trees. In the flash of my headlamp I saw it, pale limbs far too long, a face like a shadow with glinting pinpricks. Where eyes should be. "Run?" I shouted, all thought of stealth gone. We tore through the forest, driven by pure panic. Branches lashed at our faces, roots clawed at our boots, but we didn't stop. Behind us, the sounds exploded into a frenzy in human shrieks, snapping wood, crashing footsteps. I don't know how long we ran, minutes, maybe hours. Then, as if dropped into a dream, we broke through the tree line and onto a gravel road. A ranger station stood just ahead, its windows glowing like beacons. We staggered toward it, breathless and shaking. As I reached the door, I turned for one last look at the woods. There, at the edge of the trees, it stood, tall, too tall. Limbs twisted, body impossibly lean. It raised one hand more claw than human, and for a moment I thought it might follow. But then it turned and vanished into the dark, gone, without a trace. The rangers, of course, were skeptical. They blamed it on exhaustion, dehydration, overactive imaginations. Still, they sent out a search team to investigate the site we described. They found nothing, no torn tent, no scattered gear. Not even a cold fire pit. It was like the entire scene had been swallowed by the woods. In the days that followed, as Jamie and I recovered in a nearby town, I kept thinking about the silver locket, the one I'd grabbed without thinking. When I finally opened it, I found a photo inside. A family of four, mother, father, 2 kids smiling, in front of a clearing that looked far too familiar. I never told anyone about the locket. Some instinct told me not to. It would only raise more questions I wasn't sure I wanted answered. Jamie and I never finished our hike. We packed up and went home. No discussion, no argument. It was just understood. The trail was over. We rarely talk about what happened. But sometimes when the wind howls through the trees at night, I think of that clearing, of that thing in the forest. And I wonder, with a cold shiver running through me, if it's still thinking about us too. The scream that tore through the cab of my truck that night wasn't human. It couldn't have been. No person could make a sound like that, raw, primal, filled with a terror so deep it made my blood run cold. But it came from the man sitting beside me, the hitchhiker I'd picked up just an hour earlier. And as his eyes snapped open, reflecting the dashboard lights like some wild animals, I knew, without a doubt, that whatever had just happened, whatever he'd seen in his dreams, was far from over. My name's Jack, and I've been hauling freight across the country in a big rig for close to 20 years. I've seen my fair share of strange things on empty highways, phantom lights, freak weather, even the odd UFO, though that usually comes after a few too many beers. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on that moonless night, somewhere in the middle of nowhere, Nevada. It had started off like any other run Phoenix to Seattle with a trailer full of electronics. I was making good time, the miles slipping away beneath my wheels as I rolled through the desert night. The radio keeping me company, old country. Ballads and crackly late-night shows about conspiracies and alien encounters. I was about halfway through Nevada when I saw him, a lone figure standing on the roadside, thumb extended. Now, I'm not in the habit of picking up hitchhikers, too many bad stories, too many unknowns. But something about this guy made me slow down. Maybe it was the hollow look in his eyes or the way he clutched himself against the cold desert wind. Whatever the reason, I found myself pulling over before I could second-guess it. "Where you headed?" I called as he approached. "Anywhere but here," he replied, voice barely more than a whisper. I should have driven off right then. But instead I heard myself say, "Hop in. I'm headed to Seattle if that works for you." He climbed in, bringing with him the smell of dust and something else I couldn't quite place. Up close, he looked young, mid-20s, maybe, with shaggy brown hair and eyes that flicked nervously around the cab. "I'm Jack," I said, easing back onto the road. "Mike," he replied, still not looking at me. "Thanks for the ride." We drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine and the hiss of tires the only sounds. I tried to make small talk a few times, but Mike's answers were short and distant. Eventually I gave up and focused on the road. About an hour later, I glanced over and saw that Mike had fallen asleep, his head resting against the window. I turned the radio down a notch, not wanting to wake him. That's when things started to get weird. It began with a twitch, just a small spasm in his hand. Then his breathing changed, rapid and shallow. His eyes darted beneath closed lids like he was trapped in some intense dream. I leaned over, ready to wake him, worried he might be having a seizure or something, but then he started murmuring. At first it was too quiet to catch, but it quickly escalated. "No, please, don't let it find me." A chill ran through me, his voice thick with fear, raw and desperate. "Hey, buddy," I said, reaching over to shake his shoulder. "Wake up, you're dreaming." But he didn't wake. Instead, the muttering grew louder, more frantic. His whole body began to thrash in the seat. "It's coming. Oh God, it's coming. Can't you see it? Can't you see its eyes?" And then he screamed. A scream so blood-curdling I nearly drove off the road. His eyes flew open, wide and wild, catching the dashboard lights like an animal's in the dark. I yanked the wheel and pulled over, heart hammering in my chest. Mike, snap out of it." He turned toward me, but his eyes weren't seeing me. They were seeing something else, something far away. "It followed me," he whispered, voice hoarse. Oh God, Jack, it followed me into the truck. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. "What followed you, Mike?" "There's nothing here but us." He shook his head violently. "You can't see it, but it's here. It's always here." His gaze darted around the cab, tracking something I couldn't see. "We have to get out now." Before I could react, he'd flung the passenger door open and bolted into the night. I cursed, fumbled with my seatbelt, and chased. After him, the desert was cold and dead still. The only sounds were the ticking of the cooling engine and Mike's ragged, panicked breathing. He stood a few feet away, arms wrapped around himself, trembling like a leaf. "Mike," I said, keeping my voice low as if calming a spooked animal. "What's going on? What do you think is following you?" He turned the truck's headlights, painting his face ghost pale. "I don't know what it is," he said, voice barely holding together. "But it's been after me for days, ever since I found that thing in the desert." "What thing?" I asked, a knot forming. "In my gut." Mike reached into his pocket with a shaking hand and pulled out what looked like a small stone. But as he held it up, I saw it wasn't a stone at all. It was some kind of artifact carved with strange, intricate symbols I'd never seen before. and in the harsh glow of the headlights, the symbols seemed to shimmer and twist as if they were moving. "I found this out there," Mike said, gesturing vaguely to the vast darkness beyond us. "In some old ruin. Thought it might be worth something." He gave a bitter laugh. "I didn't know. I didn't know it would wake it up." "Wake. What up?" I asked, though a part of me already feared the answer. Mike's eyes locked onto mine, filled with a terror that chilled me to the core. "The thing that lives in the spaces between. The thing that hunts in dreams. It wants this back," he said, holding up the artifact. "And it wants me for taking it." I wanted to tell him he was delusional, that it was just a nightmare, that no monster was after him. But the certainty in his voice, the raw panic in his eyes, it was impossible to dismiss. "Okay," I said, trying to sound steady. "Okay. So why don't we just give it back? Throw it away and be done." Mike shook his head furiously. "I've tried. It doesn't work like that. It's like it's bonded to me now. The only way to get rid of it is to pass it on to make someone else accept it." A shiver ran through me as I realized what he meant. "That's why you were hitchhiking. You were trying to pass it off on someone else." He nodded, tears streaking down his cheeks. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't want to, but I can't take it anymore. The dreams, the visions, they're breaking me." I took a step back, suddenly hyper-aware of just how isolated we were in the desert. Mike, I won't take that thing." "Please," he begged, thrusting the artifact toward me. "Please, I can't do this anymore. Just take it. You'll see. You'll understand." For a second, I faltered. The artifact almost seemed to call to me, the symbols pulsing in a hypnotic rhythm, but then I blinked hard, shaking myself free. "No," I said firmly. "I won't do it, Mike, but I'll help you. We'll figure something out together, okay? There has to be a way to get rid of it without dooming someone else." Mike stared at me for a long beat, his face unreadable in the dim light. Then, slowly he nodded. "Okay," he whispered. "Okay, we'll try." We climbed back into the truck, the artifact wrapped in a rag and tucked into the glove box. As I eased back onto the road, I couldn't shake the sense that something had shifted. The night felt heavier somehow, the shadows deeper. And more than once I thought I glimpsed something just beyond the edge of the headlights, something tall and gaunt, with too many limbs. I don't know what became of Mike after I dropped him off in Reno. He said he was going to find someone, an expert, who might know how to destroy the artifact for good. I gave him my number, made him promise to call once he was safe. It's been 3 months now, he hasn't called. Sometimes on long hauls through the desert at night, I catch myself scanning the roadside, half expecting to see him standing there, thumb out. And now and then, in that foggy space between sleep and waking, I see shapes in my room, tall, twisted things with too many glinting eyes. I tell myself it's just imagination, just leftovers from that strange, haunted night. But deep down, I know better. Whatever chased Mike that night, whatever hunts in dreams, it's still out there, waiting, watching. And sometimes, when the night is stillest and the road stretches on like a ribbon into blackness, I feel it. Watching me too. It was a hot, sticky afternoon in late July when Mr. Harrison asked me to clean out one of the old barns. "Been meaning to do it for years," he muttered. "Might as well put you to work on it. Just stack anything worth keeping, haul the rest to the burn pile." The barn was massive and hollow, its dim interior a welcome contrast to the brutal heat outside. Sunlight sliced through cracks in the weathered boards, dust motes swirling like tiny ghosts in the still air. The place reeked of old hay and something else, faint and chemical, sharp enough to catch my attention. I started in one corner, picking through heaps of rusted equipment, rotting feed bags, and busted furniture. The job was dull and repetitive, my thoughts drifting as I dragged piece after piece to the junk pile outside. That's when I noticed the floorboard loose, barely noticeable, my boot catching just enough to trip me. Curious, I dropped to my knees, pried it up, and found a narrow space hidden beneath the wood. Inside was a journal wrapped in oilcloth, surprisingly intact despite the years buried in dirt and dust. I hesitated, glancing over my shoulder even though I knew Mr. Harrison was still out working the fields. It felt wrong, like an invasion. of privacy, but I couldn't help myself. What started as idle curiosity quickly twisted into something darker. The journal belonged to a Dr. Elliot Harrison, dated 1954, Mr. Harrison's father, I realized with a jolt. But this wasn't the diary of a simple farmer. These pages read like a scientist's notebook. He wrote about advanced experiments to breed more resilient, more productive livestock using genetic techniques. But the horror began when he mentioned human trials, vague hints about subjects from the nearby asylum. My fingers trembled as I flipped through pages filled with anatomical sketches and monstrous descriptions. Hybrid beings, neither man nor animal, grotesque failures and quiet successes inked with obsessive clarity. The further I read, the more I felt his dissent, his belief that he was changing the future of agriculture forever. The last entry, dated 1963, was a mess, scribbled, shaky, almost incoherent. It's done. The experiment worked, but what have I done? They're out there now, hiding. I hear them at night. Scratching. God forgive me. I slammed the book shut, heart hammering. It had to be a hoax. A story, or the mad ravings of a man who'd lost touch with reality. Still, the unease lingered, reminding me of strange things I'd brushed off since arriving. The weird sounds. At night I'd blamed on raccoons. The spots Mr. Harrison had told me never to wander into. The way the cattle sometimes stared into the trees, tense and silent. I shoved the journal back under the floorboard and dropped it into place, mind spinning. I needed air, sunlight, something to ground me. As I stepped out into the brightness, blinking, I nearly collided with Mr. Harrison. Making headway? He asked, eyeing the growing pile outside the barn. I nodded stiffly, not trusting my voice to come out steady. Did he know about the journal? About what his father had written? His gaze lingered a second too long, brows drawing together slightly. You all right, Sam? You look like you've seen a ghost. I'm good, I said quickly. Just hot in there. Needed a breather. He nodded slowly, eyes still on me. Well, don't overdo it. Come on up to the house when you're done. I'll cook us some dinner. I watched him walk away, trying to square the gruff man I worked for with the secrets buried in that barn. Was he continuing those experiments? Or was he just as haunted by them as I now was? That night, lying in the tiny apartment above the garage Mr. Harrison let me stay in, I couldn't sleep. Every creak of the old wood, every rustle in the cornfields outside set my nerves on edge. I kept thinking about the journal, about the creatures Dr. Harrison had described. Were they still out there, even after all these years? A sudden noise outside my window jolted me upright. It was a strange, guttural sound unlike anything I'd ever heard before. Heart pounding, I crept to the window and peered into the darkness. At first I saw nothing, but then movement caught my eye. Something was moving in the field beyond the barn, something big, and definitely not a cow. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. Then it turned and I caught a glimpse of its face in the moonlight. I stumbled back I pressed my face to the glass, choking back a scream. What I'd seen wasn't human, but it wasn't entirely animal either. It was something in between, something that shouldn't exist. I spent the rest of the night curled in bed, every muscle tense, listening to the sounds outside. When dawn finally broke, I was exhausted but relieved. Surely in daylight, everything would make sense again. But as the days passed, strange events began piling up. Tools vanished, only to turn up in odd places. The cattle grew more agitated with each passing night. And more than once I caught Mr. Harrison staring off into the woods, his face dark with worry. I thought about leaving, packing up, and putting Willow Creek Farm far behind me, but something held me back. Curiosity, maybe? Or guilt, or a sense of duty. Whatever Dr. Harrison had done, whatever he had brought into the world, it was still here. And maybe, just maybe, I could do something about it. I started investigating, slowly and carefully. I reread the journal, took notes, tried to wrap my head around the twisted science it described. I explored the outer edges of the property, the areas Mr. Harrison had warned me to avoid searching for clues. Little by little, the truth came into focus. The experiments hadn't ended with Doctor. Harrison's final entry, they had been passed down. From father to son, Mr. Harrison wasn't just aware of his father's legacy, he was trying to fix it. It all came to a head on a stormy night in late August. I awoke to shattering glass, and Mr. Harrison shouting. Rain pelted my face as I sprinted to the farmhouse, heart racing. The front door hung off its hinges, splintered and broken. Inside, the scene was chaos, furniture overturned, claw marks carved into the walls. In the center of the room, Mr. Harrison stood his ground, facing a creature beyond imagination. Part man, part beast, a grotesque patchwork of mismatched limbs and glowing, intelligent eyes. "Sam!" Mr. Harrison shouted when he saw me. That's when I noticed the syringe on the mantel large, filled with glowing blue liquid. Without thinking, I grabbed it and tossed it to him. In one fluid motion, he caught it and drove the needle into the creature's neck. The thing let out a howl that chilled my blood. It thrashed violently for a few seconds, then collapsed, twitching on the floor. Its form shimmered and warped, slowly dissolving into something else. In moments, all that remained was an unconscious man, very human and very real. Mr. Harrison fell to his knees, his face drawn with relief and exhaustion. "It's over," he whispered. "It's finally over." In the days that followed, he told me everything. How his father's work had birthed a handful of hybrid beings. How they'd hidden in the woods for decades, emerging only to haunt the farm. And how Mr. Harrison had spent his entire life searching for a cure. The man we captured that night had been the last. With him cured, the nightmare had finally ended. But the shadow of what had happened, the darkness behind Willow Creek Farm will never fully lift. I still work alongside Mr. Harrison. We've never told anyone about that night. And really, who would believe us? But sometimes on quiet nights, when the wind sighs through the cornfields, I catch myself scanning the tree line, wondering if we truly found them all. And I can't help but reflect on that fragile line between scientific progress and playing. God, how easy it is to cross it, even with the best intentions. The secrets of Willow Creek Farm are buried now, just as they should be. But the lessons about responsibility, about the unforeseen consequences of our actions, those will stay with me forever. And I'll never see a peaceful rural farm the same way again. The footprints ended abruptly in the middle of the field, as if whoever made them had simply vanished into thin air. I stood frozen, flashlight in hand, my brain struggling to process what I was seeing. 20 years on the force, and I'd never come across anything like this. The car was still running, keys in the ignition, the driver's belongings untouched. It was like the driver had stepped out for a moment and then just disappeared. I didn't know it then, but that call-so routine on the surface would drag me into a tangle of impossible events and unanswered questions that would haunt me for years. My name's Sarah Jennings, and I've been a Nevada State Trooper for 2 decades. I thought I'd seen everything: high-speed chases, grisly accidents, even the occasional UFO report from some poor soul baked too long by the desert sun. But nothing prepared me for that night on a desolate stretch of Highway 50, deep in the heart of what the locals call the loneliest road in America. It started like any other quiet night shift. I was cruising along the empty highway. More tumbleweeds than traffic keeping me company when the call came in. A passing motorist had spotted a car abandoned on the roadside, hazard lights flashing. Standard fare, I'd check it out, call in a tow if needed, and be back on patrol in no time. Pulling up behind the vehicle, a late model sedan, nothing. Unusual, I immediately noticed something off. The engine was still running. Approaching cautiously, one hand resting on my holster out of habit, I saw the driver's door slightly ajar. But the driver was nowhere in sight. I swept my flashlight through the interior. Everything seemed untouched. A half-empty water bottle in the cup holder, a phone charging on the dash, a duffel bag on the back seat. No sign of a struggle, no. Blood, nothing out of place? Hello? I called out, my beam slicing into the open desert around me. Anyone there? Only the soft rustle of wind answered. That's when I saw them, the footprints. A single set leading away from the driver side and out into the field beside the highway. They were clear, Deliberate, not the staggering prints of someone hurt or disoriented. I radioed in my position and began to follow them. The field was mostly barren scrub brush, dry grass, and cracked earth-perfect terrain for tracking. I expected to find the driver crouched behind a bush or maybe dazed and wandering. Instead, I found nothing. The footprints stopped abruptly about 50 yards in. One moment they were there, plain as day, and the next, nothing. Just undisturbed dirt stretching into the darkness. I stood there, flashlight trembling slightly, unwilling to believe what I was seeing. People don't just vanish. There had to be an explanation. I widened my search, scanning the ground in a careful spiral, looking for any sign. No scuffs, no drag marks, no disturbed soil. Just that trail of footprints, ending like someone had been lifted clean into the sky. By the time backup arrived, I was sweating despite the night chill. My partner Mike took one look at my face and knew something was off. "What do we have, Sarah?" he asked, hand drifting toward his weapon. I laid it all out for him, showed him the vehicle, then led him out to the prints. He followed me in silence, growing more puzzled with every step. "This is weird," he muttered at last, staring at the place where the trail simply ended. "Really weird." We radioed for forensics and sealed off the area. The next few hours were a blur: photographs, plaster casts, a full sweep of the vehicle. The driver was identified as David Chun, 37, a software engineer out of San Francisco. We reached out to his family. No, they hadn't spoken to him. Yes, he was on his way to Denver to visit. No, there was no history of mental illness, no signs of trouble. By the time the sun rose, casting long morning shadows over the field, we were no closer to an answer. David Chin had disappeared, left behind a running car and a trail of footprints that ended in the middle of nowhere. The investigation ramped up in the days that followed. Search teams combed the area. Helicopters equipped with thermal cameras scanned miles in every direction. David's digital footprint calls, bank records, browsing history was scrutinized. Missing persons bulletins went out across state lines. Nothing, not a single clue as to what had happened to David Chun. Theories flooded in, each more outlandish than the last. Some claimed he'd been abducted by criminals, others by a cult or aliens. There were whispers about staged disappearances, secret government experiments, even portals to other dimensions. I tried to stay grounded, focused on facts. But the deeper I dug, the stranger things became. A week after David vanished, I got an anonymous tip. The caller's voice was trembling, distorted by some kind of modulator. They told me to look into something called the Highway of Tears. At first, I brushed it off as another wild goose chase. But there was something in the caller's urgency that stuck with me. That night, unable to sleep, I started digging. And what I found chilled me to the bone. The Highway of Tears, it turned out, it wasn't just one highway. It was a phenomenon reported in multiple states, even multiple countries. Long, empty roads where people disappeared without a trace, often leaving behind perfectly working vehicles. In some cases, witnesses described strange lights in the sky. In others, they spoke of disorienting lapses in time, like the world itself had shifted. The more I researched, the more similar cases I found, eerily like David's, a woman in Alaska. Car running, purse on the seat, footprints vanishing into snow. A trucker in Australia disappeared mid-route, his rig left idling on the roadside in the outback. I started a file, cross-referencing locations and dates, hunting for patterns. Most vanishings occurred at night and in remote areas. Many were preceded by strange electronic malfunctions, phones dying, radios cutting out, engines stalling. As my off-duty hours became consumed by the search, I began to change. I grew jumpy, on edge. Every time I patrolled Highway 50, I scanned the horizon, half expecting lights or figures in the dark. My coworkers noticed. Mike cornered me one night over lukewarm coffee in the station. "Sarah, you've got to let this go," he said, concern written all over his face. "The Chun case is cold. It's tearing you apart." I wanted to tell him everything, about the Highway of Tears, about the files, the patterns. But I knew how it would sound. I'd be benched, sent for a psych eval. So I nodded, told him I'd take a break, clear my head. But I couldn't let it go. The very next night, I was back out on Highway 50 off duty in my personal car. In the back, I had cameras and gear I'd borrowed from a UFO chaser friend. I didn't know what I was looking for. Proof, maybe. Something that could make sense of the senseless. Instead, I got something else. Just after midnight, the radio crackled to life, nothing but static. At first, I didn't think much of it. Reception's always spotty out here. But then the dashboard lights flickered. My headlights dimmed, then pulsed, then dimmed again. Heart pounding, I pulled over. This was it, the electrical interference I'd read about. I grabbed my camera, ready to record whatever came next. That's when I saw the light in the field beside the road. Not headlights, not a flashlight, something else. It glowed softly, bluish-white, suspended about 6 feet off the ground. I stepped out of the car, camera limp in my hand. The light felt magnetic. It drew me toward it. I took a step. Then another. Somewhere, deep inside, a voice screamed for me to stop, to turn around, to run. But that voice was drowned out by something else, an overwhelming sense of curiosity. I had to see what it was, had to understand. I don't know how long I walked. Time lost all meaning. The light stayed just ahead, always slightly out of reach. I was vaguely aware of brush scraping my legs, of my breath quickening, and then suddenly it was gone. The spell broke. I blinked, confused, and looked around. I was standing in the middle of a field with no clue how far I'd gone. I turned back, expecting to see my car's headlights. But there was nothing, no car, no road. Just desert stretching in every direction, silver under a moon I didn't remember seeing earlier. Panic surged through me. I spun in a slow circle, desperate for bearings. And that's when I saw them, footprints in the dirt, my footprints leading to where I stood. And beyond them, another set familiar prints I'd seen once before ending abruptly in the middle of nowhere. I stared, my mind spinning as the full weight of it sank in. I understood now. I was no longer the investigator. I had become part of the mystery. As the first light of dawn bled across the horizon, I made a choice. I would follow those footprints, David Chun's footprints. Whatever had happened to him, whatever lay beyond that impossible vanishing point, I was going to find it. I drew a deep breath, bracing myself for whatever came next, then stepped forward, leaving a new trail behind me in the desert sand. Somewhere out there in the emptiness of the Nevada desert stretched endlessly an abandoned car, engine still running, and a set of footprints that led to nowhere. The highway of tears had claimed another soul, and now I was just another mystery on the loneliest road in America. The first footprint appeared like a ghost in the morning dew, its shape undeniably human, but far too large to belong to any of us. I stared at it, coffee mug forgotten in my grip as the rising sun cast long shadows over our ravaged campsite. Food scattered, tents slashed, and an eerie silence where birdsong should have filled the morning air. But it was that one massive footprint that sent a chill crawling up my spine. Whatever had come during the night wasn't any ordinary animal, and I had the sickening sense it wasn't done with us yet. My name's Alex, and this camping trip was supposed to be a reset for my family. A chance to unplug, reconnect, remember what it felt like to simply be present. My wife, Sarah, our kids, Lily and Max, and I had spent months planning this escape to Blue Pine Campground, a remote site deep in the mountains. We arrived late yesterday afternoon, the kids buzzing with excitement as we pitched our tents and gathered firewood. As the sun dipped behind the trees, we roasted marshmallows and told ghost stories, our laughter echoing through the woods. It felt perfect, like we'd finally broken free of the grind. If only I'd known how fast that peace would unravel into a waking nightmare. The first warning came sometime after midnight. I woke to rustling sounds outside the tent, too heavy to be a raccoon or any of the wildlife we'd been warned about. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the flap, peering out into the dark. My beam caught movement, something large, ducking behind a tree too fast for me to get a clear look. Heart racing, I zipped the tent shut and lay awake for hours, listening to something big circling our camp. When morning finally came, we saw the damage in full. Our cooler overturned, its contents scattered, claw marks along the tents. And in a patch of bare earth, that massive footprint. Alex, what's going on? Sarah's voice cut through my haze. She stood at the tent entrance, her eyes wide as she took it all in. I tried to sound calm for her sake. Looks like we had a visitor. Probably a bear. But even as I said it, I knew I was lying. Bears didn't leave prints like that. As Sarah woke the kids and we started cleaning up, I couldn't shake the feeling we were being watched. The woods felt too quiet, the shadows too still. Dad, can we go home now? Lily's voice was small, frightened. She clutched her stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. I wanted to say yes, I wanted to pack up and leave this place behind. But when I tried the ignition, cold dread settled in my gut. The engine sputtered, then died, refusing to turn over. It's okay, I told them, faking confidence. Probably just the battery. I'll hike to the ranger station and get help. Sarah grabbed my arm, her voice tight. You can't go out there alone. What if whatever did this is still out there? She was right. But we didn't have a better option. In the end, we stayed together. We packed supplies and started down the trail toward the ranger station. It was only 5 miles, a simple hike under normal circumstances. But now, every crack of a twig, every rustle of leaves chipped away at our nerves. We were halfway there. When Max saw it, another footprint pressed into a patch of soft mud. Larger than the first, fresher. It's following us, Sarah whispered, drawing the kids close. I wanted to tell her it was just a coincidence, but I couldn't, because deep down I knew. We picked up the pace, the kids crying softly as brush scraped at their arms and legs. The sun was setting. The woods were darkening, and the ranger station still felt impossibly far away. Then we heard a low, guttural growl that seemed to echo from everywhere and nowhere. Lily screamed. Max broke down in tears. Run, I shouted, scooping up Lily as Sarah grabbed Max's hand. We tore down the trail, blind panic driving us forward. Branches whipped our faces, roots snagged our feet with every desperate stride, and all the while that growl grew louder, closer. I risked a glance back and instantly regretted it. Something huge was weaving through the trees behind us, cloaked in shadow. I caught a glimpse of glowing eyes and a flash of jagged teeth before yanking my gaze away, running harder than I ever had. We burst into a clearing, gasping for breath, and there, like a vision, stood a cabin. Not the ranger station we'd been aiming for, but in that moment, it was salvation. Without hesitation, we sprinted to the door, praying it would open. The handle turned under my hand, and we tumbled inside, slamming it shut behind us. For a long, breathless moment, we just stood there, chests heaving, straining to hear. Heavy. Footsteps circled outside, and then came the scraping sharp claws against wood, and a low, guttural growl that echoed through the walls. What is it, Daddy? Lily whimpered, burying her face into my neck. I don't know, sweetheart, I whispered, stroking her hair. But we're safe in here. It can't get in? As our eyes adjusted to the gloom, we scanned the cabin. It was a small one room with a stone fireplace, a few rough-hewn pieces of furniture, and shelves stocked with canned goods and basic supplies. It looked like an old hunting cabin or an emergency shelter. Sarah found lanterns on a shelf and lit them, casting flickering warmth across the room. The kids huddled on a worn-out couch while she pulled me aside. Alex, what are we going to do? She whispered, voice shaking. What if it doesn't leave? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to think. We've got food and a roof. We waited out. Someone will come looking for us. But as the night dragged on, that hope began to falter. The creature didn't leave. We heard it stalking the perimeter, pressing against the walls, testing. The door, every so often it let out a furious roar that rattled the windows. Eventually, the kids drifted into an uneasy sleep, worn out from fear and exhaustion. Sarah and I took turns keeping watch, eyes glued to the windows, searching the darkness for any sign of movement. During my shift in the blackest part of the night, I saw it clearly for the first time. The moon slid free of the clouds, bathing the clearing in silver light. And there, at the tree line, it stood. The creature. It was massive, easily 8 feet tall, grotesque blend of beasts. Its body was cloaked in fur, but I could see patches of scales and, disturbingly, feathers. Its face was something between a bear and a man, with eyes glowing a sickly yellow. Paralyzed, I stared as it locked eyes with me. Then, slowly, it smiled, lips pulling back to reveal rows of jagged, gleaming teeth. I stumbled away from the window, heart pounding so hard I could barely breathe. This couldn't be real. But the growl outside said otherwise. I don't know how long we stayed trapped in that cabin. Days blurred together, marked only by sunrise, sunset, and the ever-present threat outside. We rationed carefully, knowing we could be stuck for a while. The kids remarkably found ways to distract themselves, turning the ordeal into a strange sort of game. But Sarah was wearing thin. The constant fear was eating at her. On what I think was the 5th day, we woke to silence. No growling. Number. Scraping claws. Nothing. I peeked out the window. The clearing was empty. Still, we waited another full day before daring to leave. When we stepped outside, the forest had returned to normal. Birds chirped. Squirrels chattered. But the claw marks on the cabin and the huge footprints in the soft mud told another story. We made our way back to the campsite, half expecting to find it destroyed. Instead, we found park rangers and a search team. Someone had reported our abandoned car, and they'd come looking. Our car had been repaired, apparently a loose wire. We told them a cleaned-up version of the truth. We'd gotten lost, found a cabin, waited out bad weather. Who would believe the rest? As we drove home, the kids chattered about their adventure. But I couldn't shake what we'd seen, what we'd survived. That thing. It wasn't natural. It was something ancient, something primal, something that doesn't belong in our world. We never went camping again. But sometimes when the wind howls at night outside our locked doors, I think of that cabin in the woods. And I wonder if, out there in the wild, that thing still roams, waiting for the next unsuspecting family to cross its path. Because the wilderness holds secrets, dark ones, and sometimes those secrets have teeth. The first thing I noticed was the silence. On a cruise ship carrying over 3,000 passengers and 1,500 crew, silence is never a good sign. I stood in the middle of the Lido deck, where just hours earlier families had splashed in the pool and music had pulsed from the speakers. Now, only the gentle lap of waves against the hull and the distant hum of engines remained. Turning slowly. In a circle, I took in the abandoned lounge chairs and half-empty cocktails, a chill creeping down my spine. Where was everyone? And why did the air suddenly feel different? My name is Mia Chun, and what was supposed to be a relaxing Caribbean cruise became the most bewildering and terrifying experience of my life. I'm still not sure I believe what happened. But one thing is certain, time isn't as linear as we think, and sometimes the fabric of reality slips in ways we can't begin to understand. It had started as a typical day at sea. I woke late, nursing a mild hangover from the previous night's karaoke party. After a greasy breakfast, I spent the morning lounging by the pool, absorbed in my latest beach read. Around noon, I decided to head back to my cabin for a nap before the afternoon's activities. I remember closing my eyes, the ship's gentle rocking lulling me to sleep. When I woke, the light filtering through my porthole felt off dimmer, with a strange bluish tint I'd never seen before. Disoriented, I reached for my phone. The screen was black, completely dead even, though I'd left it fully charged. Frowning, I picked up the cabin phone. Nothing but a faint, eerie buzz. Then I noticed the silence. No distant laughter from the hall, no muffled announcements over the PA, just an oppressive stillness. Unease coiled in my gut. I stepped into the hallway, deserted. The usual bustle of guests and crew had vanished. My footsteps echoed unnaturally loud as I made my way toward the elevator bank. "Hello?" I called out, my voice small in the empty corridor. No answer. The elevator arrived with a cheerful ding that felt grotesquely out of place in the thick silence. As I rode up to the Lido deck, I tried to make sense of it. Maybe an emergency drill I'd slept through? But no, they always announced those well in advance. And surely someone would have woken me. When the door slid open, the full weight of the strangeness hit me. The vast open-air deck was completely deserted. Lounge chairs sat vacant, some draped with towels and dog-eared paperbacks as if their owners had just stepped away. The bars were unmanned, rows of colorful drinks left to sweat on the counters. I walked slowly around the deck, heart pounding. "Hello?" I called again, louder this time. "Is anyone here?" Only the ocean answered. As I completed my circuit of the deck, I spotted something that made my blood run cold. The lifeboats, all still in place. If there had been an evacuation, they would have been launched. That realization triggered full-blown panic. I spent the next few hours scouring the ship deck by deck, my dread mounting with each empty hallway and silent lounge. I found the theater mid-setup for the evening show. The casino slot machines blinked silently in the gloom. In the main dining room, tables were set for a dinner that would never be served. Everywhere I went, there were signs of interrupted life, half-eaten plates at the buffet, a dryer still tumbling a forgotten load of laundry, a child's stuffed animal dropped in the middle of a hallway. But of the thousands who should have been aboard, there was no trace. As night fell o'er what I assumed was night, given the deepening blue hue, I made my way to the bridge, clinging to hope that anyone might still be there. The bridge was deserted too, but at least it showed signs of function. Radar screens blinked, indicating our position in the middle of the Caribbean. Navigation systems hummed quietly. The ship was still on course, its automated systems dutifully steering through the waves. I slumped into the captain's chair, fear and fatigue crashing over me. What had happened? Where was everyone? And more importantly, what was I supposed to do now? Staring at the console, something caught my eye. A date display on one of the monitors. I blinked, convinced I was misreading it. But no. There, it was glowing in bright green, August 13th, 2024, a week. Somehow, possibly a week had passed since I laid down for that nap. I laughed, a sharp, brittle sound that echoed across the empty bridge. This wasn't real. People didn't lose entire weeks. Cruise ships full of passengers didn't vanish, and yet, here I was. The next few days, if they even were, days blurred into a surreal haze. Time had lost its meaning. I wandered the ship, leaving notes in every common area, pleading for any sign of life, for proof I wasn't completely alone. I tried every phone, every radio, every conceivable means of communication, only to be met with static. I ate from the slowly spoiling supplies in the ship's sprawling kitchens, slept fitfully in a different cabin each night, and clung to sanity by narrating my actions aloud, as if I were starring in some bizarre one-woman reality show on what I believed was the fourth day of solitude. I saw the lights. At first, I thought I was hallucinating, my mind finally splintering under the strain of isolation. But no, there they were, distant pinpricks on the horizon, growing steadily larger. Hope surged in my chest. Another ship. A rescue team. I raced to the bow, waving frantically and shouting, even though I knew they were too far to see or hear me. But as the lights neared, I realized they weren't rising from the sea, they were descending from the sky. My elation gave way to confusion, then a kind of numb acceptance. Of course, why not? After everything else, why shouldn't there be strange lights falling from the heavens? They hovered above the ship, shimmering with colors I had no names for, gorgeous, pulsing hues that rippled across the water's surface. Then, a single beam of light pierced down from the center, touching the deck just feet from where I stood. And then, just as suddenly as they had appeared, the lights vanished and I was no longer alone. The deck filled with people, passengers in swimsuits and sundresses, crew members in crisp uniforms. They wandered the space, confused, voices rising in a chaotic mix of questions and exclamations. What happened? Where did everyone go? I stood frozen, unable to process what I was seeing. A man in a captain's uniform strode toward me, concern etched across his face. Miss, are you all right? You look pale. I opened my mouth to answer, but no words came. How could I explain what had happened? In the days that followed, as the ship made its slow journey back to port, the pieces of a story began to take shape. According to everyone else, no time had passed at all. One moment, they were going about their day. The next, they were standing on deck, disoriented and confused. Only I remembered. The empty ship, the endless silence, the lights. Only I had lived through that impossible week. The story made headlines around the world. Cruise ship reappears after mysterious disappearance. Experts were consulted. Theories abounded then unraveled. Some spoke of wormholes. Others whispered of alien abduction. A few dismissed it as mass hallucination or an elaborate stunt. As for me, I gave my statement to the authorities and quietly disappeared from the spotlight. How could I explain something I didn't understand? How could I describe the bone-deep wrongness of it all, the warped sense of time, the sense that I was slightly out of phase with reality itself? I've never set foot on another cruise ship. The ocean, once a place of serenity for me, now stirs. Only dread. And sometimes, in the darkest hours of the night, I bolt upright in bed, sweating, sure I've returned, back to that empty ship, back to drifting alone in a sea of stillness and time. I don't know what happened on the paradise of the seas. I don't know where everyone went, or why I was left behind, or what those lights in the sky truly were. But I do know this: our understanding of time, space, and reality is barely scratching the surface. There are forces at work beyond our comprehension, and sometimes, if you're very unlucky, you catch a glimpse. A peek behind the veil into the vast, terrifying unknown. I saw that glimpse. And it changed me. So the next time you're on a cruiser, any vessel, really, and you feel the air shift or the light dim just so, or find yourself suddenly, inexplicably alone in a place that should be full of people, remember my story, and hope with every fiber of your being that you don't slip through the cracks like I did. Because once you've endured that kind of impossible solitude, you're never quite the same again. The cabin's owner, a gruff older man named Bill, met us with the keys. As he gave us a brief tour, I couldn't help but notice how his eyes kept darting around, never settling in one place. "Couple things to keep in mind," he said on the porch. "Don't go wandering in the woods after dark, lots of wildlife. Out here, and it's easy to get turned around. And if you hear any strange noises at night, just ignore 'em. Probably raccoons or something. I nodded, not thinking much of it. Every cabin owner had their quirks and warnings. "Oh, and one more thing," Bill added, placing a hand on the door. "Whatever you do, don't open the doors or windows at night, no matter what you hear." "Got it?" Before we could ask why, he was already gone, his truck kicking up a cloud of dust as it rumbled down the dirt road. Emily and I exchanged a look. "Well, that was weird," she said with a nervous laugh. I shrugged it off, probably just trying to scare the city folk. "Come on, let's unpack." The rest of the day was perfect. We hiked a nearby trail, cooked dinner on the old wood stove, and spent the evening cuddled on the porch swing, watching stars appear in a sky untouched by city lights. But as we got ready for bed, I noticed the scratches long, deep gouges along the inside of the doors and around the windows. They looked like something with claws had tried to get in. "Come look at this," I called. Emily came over, frowning, as she traced the marks with her fingers. "Weird. You think a bear tried to break in or something?" she asked. "Maybe," I said, but something about those scratches made my skin crawl. They seemed too deliberate, too intentional. We joked about ghost bears to lighten the mood before bed, but as night wore on and the scratching returned, the jokes lost their charm. I lay there, every muscle tensed, listening as the sound circled the cabin. Scratch, scratch, pause. Scratch, scratch, pause. Then came the tapping on the window, like something was testing the glass. Emily stirred beside me. "Dan, do you hear that?" she whispered. I nodded, unable to find my voice. We clung to each other, barely breathing, as the tapping moved from one window to the next. After what felt like hours, it stopped. Eventually, we drifted into an uneasy sleep. When dawn broke, we tried to rationalize it: raccoons, maybe, or some especially determined owl. We spent the day hiking and swimming in a nearby lake, the bright sunshine making the night's fear seem distant and silly. But as evening fell, and we returned to the cabin, the unease returned like a shadow. We double-checked the locks, pulled the curtains tight, and tried to distract ourselves with board games and wine. The scratching started earlier that night, and it was more aggressive this time, accompanied by something else. A low, guttural sound, almost, but not quite a voice. "Daniel," Emily whispered, her face pale in the lamplight. "That's not an animal." I wanted to reassure her, to tell her it was just wind or imaginations. But as the sound grew clearer, forming noises almost like words, I couldn't lie to her or to myself. We huddled on the bed, eyes locked on the shadows beneath the door, listening as whatever was outside circled the cabin again and again. At one point, something heavy slammed itself against the front door. Something struck hard, making the entire cabin shudder. I thought about running to the car, but the keys were in the living room, and the idea of opening any door felt impossible. So we waited, holding on to each other as the night dragged on, every second stretching endlessly. Just before dawn, in that darkest hour when hope feels furthest away, a new sound reached us, footsteps on the porch, followed by a knock. Then a man's voice, gruff but mercifully normal. "Hello? Anyone in there?" We approached the door, cautiously. Through the peephole I saw Bill, the cabin owner, standing on the porch with a flashlight. Relief flooded me. "Bill, thank God, there's something out here, something—" He cut me off, stepping past us into the cabin. "I know, that's why I came. You two, okay?" We nodded, still shaken. Bill made a quick sweep, checking all the windows and doors. When he seemed satisfied, he turned to us, his expression grim. "I owe you an apology," he said. "I should have told you everything when you got here, but I was afraid you'd leave. I need the money, if I'm being honest." Emily stepped forward, voice sharp. "Tell us what's going on." Bill sighed, suddenly seeming much older. "This land, it ain't right, never has been. Far as I can remember, there's always been things living out there in the woods. Things that ain't natural, most times they keep to themselves. But now and then, especially when there's new blood, they get curious." A chill crept down my spine. "What kind of things?" He shook his head slowly. "Don't rightly know, never seen 'em clear, but I've heard 'em, felt 'em watching. They're smart. Whatever they are, smart and hungry." "Then why stay here?" Emily asked. Bill answered simply, "This land's been in my family for generations." Then dropping his voice to a whisper, he added, "Besides, I don't think they'd let me leave." We spent the rest of that night huddled in the living room with Bill, listening to his stories tales passed down through his family about people who'd vanished over the years, nights when the veil between worlds felt as thin as the edge of dawn. When the sun finally rose, casting long shadows through the trees, Bill stood up. "They'll be gone now. Can't stand the daylight? You two should pack it up and get moving. I'll refund your money." We didn't argue. Within the hour, we were in the car, speeding down the mountain road, the cabin shrinking in the rearview mirror. We never spoke much about that week, and how could we? How do you explain something you don't even understand yourself? It was easier to let the memory fade, to bury it beneath the routines of our safe, normal city lives. But sometimes, on dark nights when the wind hits just right, I find myself listening for that scratching sound. In my dreams, I still hear that almost voice calling from just beyond the walls, forming words I pray I'll never understand. I don't know what lives in those woods, why it fixated on us, or what it would have done had it gotten in. But I do know this: there are places where the veil between our world and something else wears thin, where things we weren't meant to see linger just out of sight. If you ever find yourself in a cabin miles from anywhere and you hear scratching at the door or tapping at the window, remember my story. Keep the doors locked. Keep the curtains drawn. And whatever you do, don't let it in. Because once they know you can hear them, they won't stop calling. Eventually, curiosity, fear, or just sheer exhaustion might make you answer. Take it from me, some calls are best left unanswered. Some doors were never meant to open. And some woods should remain unexplored, no matter how peaceful they seem in the light of day. The voice crackled through the CB radio, garbled with static and dread. "Please, anyone, I need help. I'm at the old Starlight truck stop. Something's here, oh God, it's coming back. Please hurry. Then silence. Just dead air. I gripped the steering wheel, knuckles white, staring down the empty highway. The rational part of my brain told me to ignore it, to just keep driving. But after 20 years on the road, I'd learned one hard truth. Out here, in the vast American night, sometimes a trucker is the only line between a stranger and something worse than death. With a muttered curse, I flicked on my turn signal and took the next exit. I didn't know it then, but that decision would take me straight into a nightmare I'm still trying to make sense of. My name's Mike Callahan, and I've been hauling freight across this country since I was old enough to hold a CDL. I've seen some weird stuff out on the highway's ghost lights, sudden storms, even what some folks would call UFOs. But nothing not? In all my miles prepared me for what I saw that night at the abandoned Starlight truck stop. It had been a routine haul, Seattle to Miami, trailer full of electronics. I was making good time, watching the miles disappear beneath my wheels as I rolled through the New Mexico desert. The radio kept me company, old country tunes and the occasional trucker chatter. Then, just past 2 a.m., that distress call broke. Through the static. At first, I figured it was kids fooling around on the channel. Wouldn't be the first time. But something in that voice, raw terror, pure desperation, made me pause. I tried to answer, get more info, but nothing came back. Just that eerie hiss of static. I knew the Starlight. It used to be a go-to spot, bright neon lights, greasy diner food, decent coffee. But it had shut down years ago after the highway reroute. Now it was just another ghost of the road left to rot in the dust. Taking the exit, a cold knot formed in my gut. What if it was a setup? Wouldn't be the first time someone tried to lure a trucker off course with a fake call. But I couldn't forget that voice. If someone really was out there, they didn't have many other options for help. The access road was more memory than pavement now, just two rutted tracks with weeds splitting the middle. My headlights sliced through the darkness, catching glimpses of tumbleweeds and windblown debris. Then, rising out of the night like a ghost, I saw it, the Starlight truck stop. And it was in worse shape than I remembered. The once bright neon. Signs stood dark, tubes shattered, windows boarded. Half the roof looked like it had caved in. The vast parking lot, once crowded with rigs from across the country, was now deserted, nothing but tumbleweeds and shattered glass. I pulled up in front of the main entrance, engine still idling. The silence was suffocating, broken only by the soft hum of my truck and the creak of warped metal as the old building shifted in the desert wind. "Hello?" I called out, my voice small, swallowed by the stillness. "Anyone here?" Nothing. No answer, not even an echo. I grabbed my flashlight from the cab and stepped out, approaching the building with caution. The boards over the doors had been torn away, revealing a black void that seemed to drink in my beam. Every instinct screamed at me to turn around, get back in the truck and drive, but I couldn't forget that desperate voice. What if someone was trapped inside, too weak to respond? I stepped through the threshold, the flashlight cutting through. Layers of dust and decay. Overturned tables, shattered dishware, peeling wallpaper. It looked like looters had picked the place clean years ago. "Hello?" I called again, my voice echoing off crumbling walls. "Anyone here?" Then I heard it, a scraping sound from somewhere in the back, like something heavy dragging across tile. "Hey, you okay back there?" My heart thundered. As I crept toward the sound, I rounded the corner into the kitchen, and my flashlight caught something that stopped me cold. Leaning against a rusted stove was a CB radio. Brand new, shiny, modern, starkly out of place in the rotten ruin. I moved closer, my mind racing. Had the person who called for help left this here? But why? And where were they now? That's when I saw the floor around its strange markings. Curved lines and symbols that twisted into each other, drawn in what looked sickeningly like dried blood. I stepped back, the silence around me suddenly deafening. Even the wind had gone still. And then I heard it, a low, guttural sound from behind, almost, but not quite, a voice. The hairs on my neck bristled as I turned around. In the doorway stood something. For a fleeting moment, my brain tried to make sense of the shape. Humanoid. but too tall, too thin, limbs bent at unnatural angles. And its face, a pale, smooth expanse where its features should have been, split down the center by a single, gaping mouth. I wish I could say I fought back or ran, but I didn't. I froze, paralyzed as the thing unfolded, rising, stretching, flowing into the room like smoke given form. Its claws reached for me, and I felt my grip on reality slipping. The last thing I heard before everything went dark was the CB radio crackling to life, that same desperate voice, calling out for help. I came to in my truck, parked on the shoulder of the highway. For a moment, I convinced myself it had all been a dream. But then I saw the dust on my clothes, scratches down my arms. And sitting in the passenger seat, the CB radio from the truck stop. My logbook showed a gap nearly 6 hours gone, vanished from memory. I drove straight to the next town, checked into a motel, and sat for hours trying to piece it together. Had I really seen that thing? Or had my brain conjured something to fill in the blanks? I thought about going to the police, but what could I say? That a ghost voice lured me off route and some nightmare thing tried to eat me? They'd either laugh or commit me. So I did the only thing I could. I got back on the road. But after that night, everything changed. I flinched at shadows, jumped every time the CB crackled. I started planning routes to avoid long stretches of desert highway, even if it added hours to the drive. And the CB radio? I couldn't bring myself to throw it away, but I couldn't keep it in the cab either. Now it's locked up in a storage unit, wrapped in chains inside a sealed box. But some nights when the wind howls just right, I swear I can hear it calling, that same voice begging for help. Since then, I've dug into the history of the Starlight truck stop. Turns out it's got quite the reputation, disappearances. Going back decades, truckers who vanished. Locals whispering about burial grounds and doorways to other worlds. I don't know what I believe anymore. I don't know if what happened was real or something in between. But I do know this. There are things out there in the dark. Things we can't explain. Things that wait just beyond the edges of our world. So, if you're ever out late, rolling down some forgotten stretch of highway, and you hear a voice on the CB begging for help, think twice. Because sometimes the cry for help doesn't come from someone in trouble. It comes from the trouble itself. And if you're ever near an old truck stop, hidden in the desert dust of New Mexico, just keep going. Don't stop. Don't turn around. Because whatever's waiting there in the dark, it remembers you. As for me, I still drive, but never at night if I can avoid it. And I keep the CB radio turned off, no matter how lonely the road gets. Because now I understand some calls are best left unanswered, and some mysteries are better left unsolved. Across the swaying wheat stalks, I stood frozen. What felt like hours was likely only a few minutes. Then, as abruptly as they'd arrived, the lights shot straight up into the sky and disappeared. I told myself I was just tired, that maybe I'd nodded off at the kitchen table and dreamed the whole thing. But deep down, I knew what I'd seen was real. For the next several nights I stayed up watching, waiting. But the lights never came back. Just when I started to believe I'd imagined it all, I woke up to find the crop circle. It was enormous, spanning nearly half my 100-acre wheat field. The design was intricate beyond belief, a series of interlocking crescents and rings spiraling outward from a central hub. The wheat wasn't broken but bent, woven together in ways that defied explanation. I called the sheriff mostly out of duty, not because I expected answers. Bob's been a friend for years, but I saw the doubt in his eyes as he surveyed the scene. "Could be kids," he offered, though he didn't sound sure. "You know how summer gets folks chasing thrills." I shook my head. "Bob, this would have taken a team all night, and they'd have left a trail. Look around. Not a single footprint, no tire tracks." He didn't have a reply for that. Word got around fast, like it always does in small towns. By midday, my driveway was jammed with gawkers, self-proclaimed UFO hunters, and local reporters. I tried keeping them off my land, but it was like trying to dam a river. That's when things really started getting strange. It began with the animals. My dogs, usually eager for belly rubs, turned mean, growling at anyone who got close to the circle. The cattle refused to graze near that side of the pasture, bunching up far from the field and bellowing through the night. Then came the equipment failures. Not just my tractor, every electronic device on the farm went haywire. Phones died minutes after charging. The TV was all static, occasionally interrupted by garbled voices speaking in some indecipherable tongue. And the dreams. God, the dreams. Each night, I wandered through the field in my sleep stalks brushing against me, whispering in a chorus just outside of understanding. Something always waited ahead of me, just beyond view. I'd wake drenched in sweat, a metallic taste on my tongue, haunted by the feeling I was on the brink of uncovering something enormous and terrifying. About a week after the circle appeared, I had a visitor. He introduced himself as Dr. Alan Friedman, an astrophysicist from the State University. He was different from the rest, quiet, deliberate, focused. "Mr. Harper," he said, eyes locked on the crop circle, "have you noticed anything else unusual since this appeared? Lights? Electronic malfunctions?" The hairs on the back of my neck rose. "How do you know about that?" He turned to me, face grim. "Because this isn't the first time. There's a pattern, Mr. Harper, and it's getting worse." Over the next few hours, Dr. Friedman told me things I wish I could forget. Crop circles with nearly identical patterns appearing across the country. UFO sightings increasing in those regions, and people vanishing always within weeks of a new circle appearing. "We think," he said quietly, "these are test sites, markers, whatever's behind this, they're preparing for something larger." I wanted to laugh it off, dismiss it all, but I couldn't, not after what I'd seen. Not after what? I'd felt. "What do they want?" I asked, throat dry. He shook his head. "We don't know, but we believe you could be in danger. People living closest to these sites, they start behaving strangely. Some claim they've received messages, instructions." A cold shiver ran through me. I thought of the dreams, the whispering in the field. "What do I do?" I asked. "Let us install monitoring equipment," he said. "And whatever happens, don't go into that field. No matter what you hear, no matter what you think you see. Promise me." I promise. But promises, I would soon learn, are hard to keep when reality itself begins to unravel around you. The next few days passed in a blur. Dr. Friedman and his team installed cameras and sensors around the perimeter of the crop circle. They collected samples of soil and wheat, murmuring to one another in hushed, uneasy tones. And all the while, the whispers in my dreams grew louder, more demanding. I'd wake up with strange symbols burned into my memory, my hands aching to draw them. The pull to step into the field, to reach its exact center, became nearly unbearable. It all came to a head on the 7th night after the circle first appeared. I was jolted awake by a sound unlike anything I'd ever heard, a low, vibrating hum that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. I stumbled to the window, and my heart slammed to a stop. The crop circle was glowing, radiating a blue-white pulse that beat in rhythm with the hum. Hovering above it were the same lights I'd seen before, but this time they were descending. I don't remember making the decision to go outside. One second I was at the window. The next, I was running across the yard in my pajamas, pulled toward the circle by a force I couldn't resist. Dr. Friedman's warning echoed dimly in the back of my mind, muffled and irrelevant. All that mattered was reaching the center, meeting whatever was coming down from the sky. I was at the edge of the field when a hand gripped my arm, yanking me back hard. Dr. Friedman stood there, his face ashen in the ethereal light. "Harper, no! No!" he shouted over the vibration. "If you go in there, we'll lose you." I fought him, the whispers inside me drowning out everything else, but he held on. Slowly, agonizingly, the compulsion began to recede. We stood there, watching and stunned. Silence as the lights descended into the circle's heart. A blinding flash filled the night, leaving spots dancing across our vision, and then nothing, the lights vanished. The humming ceased. The crop circle went dark and still. In the days that followed, my farm was overrun by government agents. They dug up the circle, tested every inch of soil, every strand of wheat. I was interrogated for hours, as were Dr. Friedman and his crew. They found nothing, no radiation, no anomalies, no concrete proof that anything unusual had happened. The official narrative became one of an elaborate hoax, despite the lack of evidence supporting it. But I know what I saw. I know what I felt. It's been 5 years since that night. I still work the land, but something changed. Nothing will grow in that field, not wheat, not corn, not even weeds. On quiet nights, I swear I can still hear the whispers at the edge of my mind. And when I look up at the stars, I can't shake the sensation that something out there is watching, waiting. I don't know what would have happened if I'd reached the circle's center. I don't know what's coming or when. But I do know this: we are not alone. The universe is stranger and far more terrifying than we dare imagine. So if you ever find a strange pattern burned into your field, if you see lights in the sky that move like no plane or satellite could, remember my story. And whatever you do, don't answer when they call. Because once you do, there's no going back. The coffee cup was still warm. That's what unsettled me most. Not the eerie silence, not the abandoned cars, not even the fresh tire tracks that led nowhere. It was the paper cup and the trash can steam still curling from its surface that made my skin crawl. Someone had been here just moments ago. But the rest stop was empty. As I stood there, the hairs on the back of my neck rose. From the corner of my eye, I saw movement. At the edge of the woods, a figure stood watching. And in that instant, I knew I'd stumbled into something I was never meant to see. Something I might not get out of. My name's Alex, and I've been driving cross-country for the better part of a decade. Long-haul trucking isn't glamorous, but it pays the bills and feeds my itch to keep moving. I've witnessed strange things on the road, odd lights in the sky, ghost towns that shouldn't exist, even what some folks might call the supernatural. But nothing, absolutely nothing, prepared me for what happened that night at the Pinewood rest stop. It was a standard Hull St. Louis to Portland with a trailer full of electronics. I'd been pushing hard, trying to make up for delays earlier in the week. The night was pitch black, the highway a narrow thread of ink unspooling beneath my wheels. I'd been fighting off sleep for the last hour, eyes burning, head swimming. When the sign for the rest stop appeared, I nearly cried with relief. Just a quick break, I told myself. Splash some water on my face, grab a cup of coffee, and I'd be good for a few more hours. The rest stop rose out of the dark like a lonely island of light. It was one of the older ones, a squat building with restrooms, vending machines, and a separate lot for trucks. I noticed a few cars in the parking area, but no people. I pulled into the truck zone, idled for a moment, and stepped out of the cab, stretching my stiff legs and rolling my shoulders. The air was unnaturally still, no breeze, no insects, no distant hum of traffic, just silence. That should have been my first warning. I made my way toward the building, my footsteps echoing far too loudly on the concrete. The door creaked as I pushed it open, the sound sharp and jarring in the stillness. Inside, the fluorescent lights hummed faintly, casting a harsh glow over the deserted space. I headed into the men's room, splashing cold water on my face and letting it trail down the back of my neck. When I looked up haggard and pale in the mirror, I caught something that made my heart stutter. Reflected in the partially open door behind me, a shadow flickered just for a second, but unmistakably human-shaped. I spun around, breath held. The doorway was empty. "Hello?" I called, my voice thin and uncertain, even to my own ears. No answer. Shaking it off as a trick of exhaustion, I left the restroom and headed for the vending machines. That's when the other strange details caught my eye. A jacket slung over a chair like its owner had just stepped away. A smartphone glowing faintly on a table, and there in the trash can by the exit that steaming cup of coffee. My skin prickled with goosebumps. Where was everyone? I stepped back outside and scanned the parking lot. The cars I'd seen earlier were still there, some with doors left ajar. I approached the nearest vehicle, a blue sedan. The keys were in the ignition, and the engine clicked softly as it cooled. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing unnaturally across the empty lot. "Anyone here?" The silence that followed was crushing. That's when I spotted the tire tracks, fresh ones leading from one of the parking spaces and ending abruptly. At the edge of the lot, as if the vehicle had vanished into thin air. My heart pounded, adrenaline burning away the fog of fatigue. Something was seriously wrong. I turned, ready to bolt back to my rig and get out of there fast. That's when I saw the figure at the forest's edge. It looked human at first, but something was off. Too tall, too thin, its body stretched in unnatural proportions. It stood completely motionless, half-shrouded behind a tree, watching me. I froze, caught in its gaze like prey under a predator's eye. For a long moment, neither of us moved. Then slowly it raised one hand and beckoned. Terror surged through me like electricity. I ran. Sprinting back toward my truck, I fumbled for my keys, cursing as they slipped from my hand and scattered into the gravel. Scrambling, I snatched them up and hauled myself into the cab. I stole one last glance outside. The figure had moved closer, no longer hidden in the trees. Bathed in the harsh fluorescent light of the rest stop, I could see it more clearly now, and God, I wish I couldn't. Its skin was pale, nearly translucent, pulled too tight over an elongated frame. Its face was smooth, featureless except for two sunken eyes that glowed like a cat's in the dark. And its mouth stretched from ear to ear, filled with rows of razor-sharp teeth. I jammed the key into the ignition, the engine roaring. To life, I slammed the truck into gear. Out of the corner of my eye, movement, more figures emerging from the woods. Dozens of them, each with that same grotesque form, gliding forward with a sickening, fluid grace. I floored it. The tires skidded, caught traction, and I tore out of that rest stop like the devil himself was on my tail, and maybe he was. I drove for hours, pushing well beyond the legal limit, not daring to stop. Not until daylight painted the sky and I'd crossed into another state. Even then, I couldn't shake the feeling I was being followed. When I finally worked up the nerve to check my mirrors, the highway behind me was empty, no signs of pursuit, no evidence of the nightmare I'd left behind. But the image of those figures, that beckoning hand, was seared into my brain. I thought about reporting it, but what could I say? That I'd seen monsters at a rest stop? I'd sound like a lunatic, so I stayed quiet. I finished the delivery. I told myself it had to be exhaustion, hallucinations, something explainable. But I couldn't forget, and I couldn't stop thinking about the people, those who left behind their cars, their phones, their still warm coffee. The ones who followed that beckoning hand into the woods. Where had they gone? What had happened to them? In the following weeks, I started digging. I'm no investigator, and I didn't have much to go on, but what I found chilled me. Stories, whispers passed between truckers and night drivers. Accounts of rest stops where people vanished without a trace. Sightings of a lone figure at the edge of the trees, always at night, always beckoning. Some say they're aliens. Others swear they're interdimensional beings. A few claim they're old gods, reawakened in a world that's forgotten them. I don't know what they are. I don't know what they want, but I know this. They're real. They're out there, hiding in the margins of the road, waiting for someone to stop, waiting for someone to follow. I still drive, but I don't travel at night unless I absolutely have to. I skip the rest stops, pushing through until I reach the safety of towns with people and lights. And I never, ever stop. If I see a lone figure standing at the edge of the woods, sometimes on those endless overnight hauls, when the road stretches black and featureless beneath my headlights, I think I catch glimpses of them in my mirrors, tall, gaunt figures keeping pace with my truck as if gravity and distance mean nothing, watching, waiting, and in those moments, I wonder if I truly escaped that night or if somehow I've been stuck ever since, trapped in some liminal space, living a life that's only a shadow of what it once was. So, if you ever find yourself driving alone in the dead of night and a rest stop materializes from the darkness, think twice before pulling in. Check your gas gauge, your caffeine level, your exhaustion. Ask yourself, is it worth the risk? Because you never know what might be lurking in those shadows. You never know who or what might be waiting to beckon you into the trees. And once you follow, you may never find your way back. Remember my story and just keep driving no matter how tired you feel. Because some rest stops aren't made for resting. Some are gateways to places we were never meant to enter. And once you cross that line, there's no coming back. The first photo showed nothing but trees. The second captured a blurred shape, just on the edge of the frame. But it was the third image that chilled my blood. There, stepping from the shadows between two towering pines, was a figure humanoid in outline, but wrong. Far too tall, too emaciated, its limbs elongated in a way that seemed to defy anatomy. And it was staring straight into the camera, straight at me. I lowered the viewfinder, hands trembling, eyes scanning the darkening forest around my campsite. Dusk was falling, and I was no longer alone in these woods. My name is Maggie Chun, and I've been a nature photographer for nearly a decade. I've trekked through rainforests, climbed alpine ridges, and slogged through bogs to capture the perfect shot. But nothing in all my experience prepared me for what I encountered in the depths of the Olympic National Forest. This was supposed to be a simple Java 2-day solo trip to document the untouched beauty of old-growth forest for a conservation magazine. I had done dozens like it, and I was actually looking forward to the solitude, just me and the wild, far from deadlines and distractions. The first few days were a dream. The forest was a photographer's paradise, soaring evergreens blanketed in moss, hidden waterfalls tucked into ravines, sunlight breaking through the canopy like golden mist. I set up base camp near a stream and spent each day venturing out, farther, chasing light and texture. But on the fourth night, things changed. I was reviewing the day's shots on my camera when I spotted something odd in one image, a faint shape lingering in the shadows between trees. At first I shrugged it off as a lighting artifact, or maybe a deer caught mid-step, but something about it stayed with me. The next morning, I returned to the spot and set up a camera trap, a motion-triggered camera designed for wildlife observation. I left it for the day while I roamed elsewhere. That evening I retrieved it and scrolled through the images, and my heart nearly stopped. There were dozens of shots in quick succession. The first few were innocuous, underbrush, squirrels, the usual, but then the figure appeared, tall, spindly-limbed, its joints bending the wrong way. Its skin, where visible, was pale and waxy, stretched tight over its skeletal frame. And its face was a smooth expanse, broken only by two jet-black eyes that caught the camera flash like mirrors. I stared at the screen, trying to convince myself it was a trick, a prank, a glitch. But as I clicked through the sequence, dread settled in. The figure was getting closer with each frame until the final shot, which showed it reaching toward the lens, its fingers a blur in motion. I packed my gear in a frenzy and all but sprinted back to camp. That night, sleep was impossible. Every twig snap outside, every flutter of wind through the canopy, sent my pulse racing. I told myself I was overreacting, that I'd find a logical explanation in the morning. But I knew better. Deep down, I knew. At dawn, I awoke to chaos. My gear had been rifled through, my pack's contents scattered like trash. The food cache, strung high in a tree to deter bears, had been shredded, the rope snapped clean like dental floss. And in the soft dirt near my tent, I found a footprint long and narrow, toes tipped with claw-like impressions. My camera was lying nearby. Hands trembling, I powered it on and checked the latest images. My heart stopped. New. Photos taken during the night. Shots of my tent, of me sleeping inside, visible through the mesh flap. And in every frame, that same figure stood nearby, drawing closer, image by image. I should have packed and left right then. Screw the assignment, screw the paycheck. But I didn't, some mix of morbid curiosity, professional pride, and plain foolishness kept me rooted. If I could just document it better, get a clear shot, maybe I could make sense of it. Maybe it would become real in a way I could understand. So I stayed. And each night it crept closer. I deployed every camera trap I had, ringed them around my site like sentinels. Night after night, they captured that thing, circling, watching, creeping. I stopped sleeping, huddled in my sleeping bag with my hunting knife clutched tight, flinching at every breeze and distant snap. By day I searched. I followed trails of crushed underbrush, found gashes on tree trunks, and even once, a tuft of hair snagged on a branch course. Gray, and like nothing I'd ever seen before, the forest transformed. What once felt ancient and serene now loomed, like a cage of shadows. The towering trees felt closer, oppressive, their branches clawing toward me. I couldn't shake the sense of being watched, not even under the midday sun. Still, I stayed. The need to understand, to document what I was seeing, had become an obsession. It all came to a head on what was supposed to be my final night in the forest. I'd planned to hike out in the morning, my assignment complete, my sanity hanging by a thread. I'd set up my cameras one last time, hoping against hope for that single, perfect shot that would prove I wasn't crazy. I must have dozed off despite the fear, because I jolted awake in the pitch dark of my tent. Something was different. The usual forest sounds, the rustling leaves, the hum of insects had gone utterly silent, and something was outside. I heard it moving, soft but deliberate circling, sniffing. I lay frozen, paralyzed with fear, as it completed its slow circuit. Then, to my horror, the zipper on my tent began to move gradually, painstakingly. The gap widened. I wanted to scream, to bolt, but my body refused to obey. I could only watch, wide-eyed in the darkness, as a pale, elongated hand with too many joints slipped through the opening. It paused there, as if tasting my terror. Then, with eerie precision, it reached toward my camera, resting beside my sleeping bag. In that instant, instinct overrode paralysis. I lunged, snatching the camera away. In the same motion, I kicked the tent wall with everything I had, tearing through the fabric and tumbling out into the night. I ran blindly, clutching the camera, to my chest like a lifeline. I tore through the underbrush, branches lashing my face, roots snagging at my feet. Behind me, I could hear it giving chase, not running exactly, but gliding with sickening speed like smoke-made flesh. I don't know how long I ran, how far. My lungs burned, legs screamed, but terror kept me moving. Then, miraculously, I saw lights ahead, the ranger station at the trailhead, glowing like a lighthouse on the edge of reality. I'd burst from the trees, gasping and crying. A ranger on duty looked up, startled. One glance at my wild eyes and shredded clothes, and he ushered me inside, locking the door behind us. The rest of that night is a blur. I remember trying to explain, the ranger's skepticism slowly giving way to concern. I remember the police arriving, taking my statement. I remember them asking to see my camera. Hands trembling, I powered it on and started scrolling through the images. But where I should have found dozens of shots proof of that impossible thing, there was nothing. Just trees, shadows, forest. Even the photos I was certain I'd taken of that reaching hand were gone. Surrounded by fluorescent light, paperwork, and the comfort of walls, the whole experience started to feel like a hallucination. Had I imagined it? Had 2 weeks alone in the deep woods pushed me too far? But then I saw it in the final photo. Faint, in the distance, barely visible behind a tree. A tall, slender figure, half concealed in shadow, blurry, almost not there. But I swear it was smiling. I've never returned to those woods. I've never told the full story to anyone, but you, my editor, got a version about startled wildlife and an early exit. The photos I submitted were carefully chosen, just mossy trunks, golden light, and pristine waterfalls. But sometimes when wind whispers through the trees outside my window, I remember. I think of what's still out there, what waits just past the threshold of understanding. And I wonder, cold to my core, if it still remembers me. So if you ever find yourself deep in the wilderness, setting up for that perfect nature shot, watch the spaces between the trees. If you catch a glimpse of movement, something that doesn't belong, don't reach for your camera. Run, and don't look back. Some things weren't meant to be captured on film, and once they know you see them, they never forget. They never stop watching, and eventually they come for you. It had to be some kind of elaborate prank or an incredibly vivid hallucination. A waiter bumped into me, breaking the spell. When I looked back, she was gone, lost in the crowd of passengers making their way to their tables. Throughout dinner, I couldn't concentrate on the conversation at my table. My eyes kept scanning the room, searching for my doppelganger. I spotted her once, seated across the dining hall, but when I blinked, she vanished again. "Sarah?" Are you okay? Mike's voice pulled me back to the moment. You look like you've seen a ghost, I forced a laugh. Sorry, I'm just a little tired, I guess. Must be all the sun. But as the evening wore on, I couldn't shake the unease creeping over me. Who was she, and why did she look exactly like me? The next morning, I was determined to find her and get some answers. I spent hours pacing the ship, checking every restaurant, lounge, and deck, but there was no sign of her anywhere. It wasn't until late afternoon that I saw her again. I was heading back to my cabin to get ready for dinner when I glimpsed her turning a corner at the far end of the hallway. I broke into a run, but when I rounded the corner, the corridor was empty. That night I couldn't sleep. Every time I shut my eyes, I saw her face my face smiling at me across the dining room. Around 2 I gave up on sleep and decided to take a walk to clear my head. The ship was eerily silent as I wandered through the deserted halls. I found myself on one of the upper decks, leaning against the railing and staring out at the moonlit sea. That's when I heard footsteps behind me, soft but unmistakable. I turned, half expecting to see my double. Instead, it was Mike, looking surprised to find me. Sarah, what are you doing up so late? I hesitated, then decided to take a chance. Mike, this is going to sound crazy, but have you seen anyone on the ship who looks like me? I mean, exactly like me? He frowned, confused. What do you mean? I told him everything about seeing my double at dinner, about chasing her through the ship. As I spoke, I watched concern deepen in his eyes. Sarah, he said gently when I finished, I think maybe you should talk to the ship's doctor. Stress can do strange things to the mind. I'm not crazy, I snapped, then immediately regretted it at the hurt look on his face. I'm sorry, I know what I saw, Mike, she's real. He nodded, though I could tell he wasn't convinced. Okay, look, why don't we try investigating tomorrow? If there's really someone on board who looks just like you, someone else has to have noticed too, right? I agreed, grateful for the offer even, if he thought I was losing it. We made plans to meet for breakfast, and I returned to my cabin feeling slightly reassured. That night I dreamed of mirrors, endless corridors of mirrors, each reflecting a slightly different version of me. I woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The following days blurred into paranoia and empty searches. Mike and I questioned passengers, combed through the passenger list, even bribed a junior crew member to let us review security footage, but there was no trace of her. Other guests began to watch me strangely. I overheard whispers as I passed, saw people pointing and muttering behind hands. More than once, someone approached to say they'd just seen me in a different part of the ship. Mike stood by me, but I could see his patience beginning to fray. Maybe it's just someone who looks a lot like you, he suggested one afternoon by the pool. And now you're seeing what you expect to see. I wanted to believe him. But deep down, I knew better. Something strange was happening on this ship. Everything came to a head on the 8th night of the cruise. I was walking back to my cabin after a late-night movie when I saw her again. She stood at the end of the corridor staring at me. This time, I wasn't letting her vanish. I ran toward her, calling out, "Wait, who are you? Why do you look like me?" She turned and fled. I chased her through the ship's winding corridors, upstairs, down narrow hallways, through lounges and restaurants. It felt like a maze, and more than once I ended up in areas of the ship I didn't recognize. Finally, I cornered her in a dead-end hallway. She stood with her back to me, her shoulders rising and falling like she'd been running too fast for too long. "Please," I panted, struggling to catch my breath. "Just tell me who you are." Slowly, she turned, and as her face came into view, the world seemed to tilt on its axis. It was my face. Yes, but wrong. The proportions were slightly skewed, eyes a touch too large, smile just a bit too wide. And as I stared, her features began to ripple and distort like a reflection disturbed by water. "Who am I?" she said, her voice a warped echo of my own. "I'm you, Sarah, or rather, I'm who you could be, who you might become." She stepped toward me, and I stumbled back until my spine hit the wall. What? What are you?" Her smile widened to something inhuman. "I'm a possibility. A potential version. This ship it drifts through a place where realities cross, where the versions of ourselves we never knew existed can meet. My thoughts reeled, trying to grasp what she was saying. But why? Why show yourself to me? She laughed, and the sound made my skin crawl. To give you a choice, of course. You can return to your safe, ordinary life. Or you can embrace the unknown, become something more. As she spoke, I noticed movement behind her. The end of the hallway shimmered, like air over hot pavement. Through it I saw flashes, flickers of other worlds, other lives. She extended her hand. Come with me, Sarah. See what you could become. For a moment I hesitated. The promise of something extraordinary tugged at me. Adventure, transformation, something beyond comprehension. But then I thought of my world, my friends, my family. Mike probably panicked, wondering where I'd gone. I shook my head. No, this is my life, my reality, and I choose it. Her expression contorted, features twisting into something no longer human. You'll regret this, she hissed and lunged. I braced for impact, eyes clenched shut, but it never came. Instead, a rush of wind surged around me, a sensation of falling, and then nothing. When I opened my eyes, I was back in my cabin. Sunlight spilled through the porthole. Laughter and footsteps echoed in the corridor outside. For a second I wondered if it had all been a dream. Then I saw it on the bedside table, a silver pendant shaped like a key. Something I'd never seen before, but that stirred a strange familiarity. I picked it up and glanced at the mirror. And for just a heartbeat, my reflection smiled back with a grin that was slightly too wide. The rest of the cruise passed without incident. I never saw my double again. In time, I convinced myself that it was all just a hallucination, stress, sun, and too little sleep. Mike and I grew closer. By the time we docked, we were already making plans to meet up back home. But sometimes, late at night, I still find myself staring at that silver key, thinking about choices, about other versions of me, other realities. And I wonder if, somewhere out there on a ship drifting between worlds, another Sarah made a different choice. So, if you're ever on a cruise and catch a glimpse of someone who looks exactly like you, stop and think, remember my story. Because sometimes our doubles aren't just reflections. Sometimes they're possibilities, and not all of them end well. The words were spoken with such urgency, so steeped in fear, they turned my blood to ice. Whatever you do, don't be here at midnight. The weathered trucker who said it was already walking away, leaving me frozen in place, half-eaten burger cooling on the plate in front of me. I glanced at my watch. 11:37 p.m. Looking around the diner, I caught the furtive glances, the stiff postures, the strained conversations, and dread began to creep in. I had wandered into something far darker than a simple late-night pit stop. My name's Jack. Up until that moment, I'd been on a routine drive New York to Los Angeles. I'm a freelance photographer, and I'd taken a last-minute job to deliver sensitive equipment too valuable for shipping. The money was good, and I figured the long drive might offer a few decent shots along the way. I'd been behind the wheel nearly 18 hours kept, going by bad gas station coffee and the pressure of a looming deadline. When I saw the neon sign for Mel's Diner glowing in the Nevada desert like a lighthouse, I figured a hot meal and real caffeine might save me. The place looked straight out of a 1950s postcard, chrome edges, red vinyl booths, a jukebox in the corner quietly spinning old rock tunes. But the moment I stepped inside, I knew something wasn't right. It was busier than expected for the hour, but the tension in the air was unmistakable. I slid into a booth and ordered a cheeseburger and coffee from a waitress whose smile didn't quite reach her eyes. As I waited for my food, I couldn't help but notice how tense everyone in the diner seemed. Conversations were hushed, and nearly every eye flicked toward the large clock above the counter. When my plate arrived, I tried making small talk with the waitress. "Busy night, huh?" She nodded, barely glancing at me, her eyes darting once more to the clock. "Yeah, it usually is around this time." "Oh, you get a lot of late-night traffic?" She hesitated, then leaned in slightly, voice low. "Look, honey, you seem like a good guy, so let me give you some advice. Eat fast and hit the road. You don't want to be here too long." Before I could ask what she meant, She turned and hurried off to another table. I sat there, burger halfway to my mouth, completely thrown. That's when the trucker at the counter swiveled toward me and whispered those haunting words. "Whatever you do, don't be here at midnight." He walked away, leaving me rattled, and I started noticing other patrons heading for the door. They moved with a quiet urgency that felt strange for the late hour. Some practically jogged to their cars. I flagged down the waitress again. "What's going on? Why is everyone leaving?" She cast another nervous glance at the clock. 11:45 p.m. now, and exhaled sharply. "I probably shouldn't be saying anything, but things happen here at midnight. Bad things. No one knows why. It's been like this for years. Some folks say this place is sitting on a convergence, a weak spot between worlds. All I know is, you don't want to be inside when the clock strikes 12. I laughed, though the sound felt brittle, even to me. "Come on! You're telling me this place is haunted or something?" Her expression stayed grim. "Worse, please, for your own good. Finish up and go." I wanted to believe it was just some weird small-town prank or an inside joke for tourists, but the look in her eyes said otherwise. The tension in the room was too thick, too real. I downed the rest of my now lukewarm coffee, tossed some bills on the table, and stood up, deciding not to wait around to find out what kind of midnight madness this was. But as I reached the front of the diner, my heart skipped a beat. The door was gone. Where the entrance had been was now just a solid wall covered in the same tacky wallpaper as the rest of the place. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes, but the wall didn't change. "It's starting," someone whispered. I turned to see the remaining patrons, maybe a dozen gathered tightly in the center of the diner. The waitress was among them, her mask of professionalism gone. She clutched a coffee pot like it was a weapon. "What's starting? What the hell is happening?" I shouted, panic rising fast. An old man with leathery skin and eyes like coal answered calmly. "It's midnight, son, or we'll be in." He checked a slim watch on his wife's wrist. 2 minutes, that's when they come." "They who? What are you talking about?" I asked, but no one answered. The lights flickered. The jukebox, which had been humming out Jerry Lee Lewis, sputtered and changed to a slow, warped melody I couldn't recognize. The air inside the diner turned icy in seconds. "Circle up!" the old man barked. "Don't look at them. And whatever happens, don't let them touch you." The group moved quickly, forming a tight circle, backs together, eyes outward. Without hesitation, I joined them, my back pressed against strangers. The waitress shoved something into my palm, a salt shaker. "Salt and iron," she said under her breath. "It's the only thing that slows them down." I wanted to laugh, to tell them they were insane, but the words caught in my throat as movement outside the window stole my breath. Shapes, darker than the night itself. They slid like smoke, but their motion had purpose, predatory, intelligent. They pressed up against the glass, which began to frost over, defying the desert heat outside. Then the clock struck midnight, and the nightmare truly began. The shadows outside thickened, morphing into vague human forms that were somehow more horrific for their familiarity. They seeped through the cracks in the windows, flowing into the diner like toxic fog. Someone whimpered. A hand grabbed mine and squeezed tightly. The old man's voice rose into a chant, speaking words I couldn't understand, sharp syllables, foreign and ancient. The others joined in, their voices shaky at first, then steadier with every repetition. The shadow figures circled us, their movements erratic and unnerving. I caught fleeting glimpses of limbs that were far too long, of faces that morphed and shimmered like smoke in a breeze. The air thickened with the scent of ozone and something far fouler, putrid and metallic. One of the entities reached for our group. Without thinking, I hurled the contents of my salt shaker at it. The thing recoiled instantly, hissing like static from a broken radio, its form unraveling before snapping back together. Time warped, stretched. I couldn't tell if minutes or hours had passed. My arm throbbed from holding it out, the salt shaker gripped tightly in my fist. My throat burned raw from chanting those alien words I didn't understand. Just as the crush of the shadowy presence felt unbearable, as though we'd be smothered by it, all something changed. The old man's voice rose to a crescendo, his chant vibrating through the very air, which shimmered and warped. The figures began to retreat. They faded, dimming into ghostly outlines before flowing back through the windows, just as the glass exploded outward in a violent shower of shards. A howling wind tore through the diner, sweeping away the final traces of the creatures and the lingering stench of decay. Then, as suddenly as it had begun, it ended. We stood in shocked silence, the only sounds our labored breathing and the crunch of shattered glass underfoot. Slowly, our circle unraveled. I noticed tears streaking some faces, others locked in. Vacant stares. The waitress broke the silence first. "Everyone okay? Anyone touched?" A chorus of weary nods and murmurs followed. No one appeared physically hurt, at least, not on the surface. As though a spell had lifted, the diner sprang into motion. People swept up debris, reset toppled chairs, and tried to reassemble their shattered calm. I just stood there, salt shaker still clutched in my hand, stunned and disoriented. The old man approached. His gaze was tired but kind. "First time, huh?" "You did good, son." I found my voice at last. What were those things? Why here? Why midnight?" He sighed and shook his head. "Wish I knew. I've come here every night for 30 years trying to figure it out. All I know is they're getting stronger. And if we hadn't been here tonight." He trailed off, the rest unspoken but obvious, as dawn's first light spilled across the desert, casting the world in pink and gold. The door to the diner was suddenly back. One by one, the patrons filed out, exchanging nods like comrades after a battle. I staggered toward my car, legs unsteady, thoughts reeling. Just as I was about to climb in, the waitress came running. She pressed a slip of paper into my palm. "If you're ever passing through again," she said, breathless, "and you want to help, this is where we'll be." I looked down. It was a scheduled dates and times. A roster of guardians standing vigil against the dark. As I eased back onto the highway, the night's events already fading like smoke. The salt shaker on my passenger seat and the paper in my hand reminded me it had all been real. I don't know if I'll ever go back. A part of me hopes I never will, but another part I didn't know existed is certain I must. Because once you've seen what's out there, once you've looked into the spaces between the seconds and glimpsed the truth, how can you turn your back on it? So if you're ever driving through the Nevada desert after dark and spot a lone diner glowing like a lighthouse in the void, think twice before stopping, and if you do, watch the clock. Because when the hands strike 12, you may find yourself face to face with nightmares, or side by side with strangers, the final line of defense against what waits beyond. And, whatever you do, don't be there at midnight. Unless, of course, you choose to be. The end.